Penguin Packs helps kids in need by providing drinks and food for over the weekend when there's no school lunch or breakfast, and the food is delivered in backpacks. The backpacks are packed at APCC and then delivered to the school on Friday. Volunteers help pack the packs during the week. Foods that are packed include non-perishable items such as juice boxes, soup cans, and granola bars. And all of the food is packed so that they can have breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snack over the weekend.
Sure. So sometimes the best opportunities are literally right in our backyards, and in our case, right here in the parking lot. We have been serving the Wick on Wheels band for just about a year now, and we are up to just about 290 children that we have provided diapers and wipes for in this past year. And I gotta tell you, it does my heart good, not only physically up and down the steps, but emotionally as well.
Good morning. If we would gather ourselves, it's time to get started. I call to order the fourth plenary of the 31st General Synod. We'll begin this morning with Speak Out, but before we begin, I'd like to make a couple of announcements. There will be an immigration rally this afternoon dealing with deportation orders, the threat of a wall, and other recent initiatives of the Trump administration. It'll be held at 1:30, gathering at the Pratt Street entrance and marching to the ICE headquarters at 31 Hopkins Place, returning to the convention center by 2:15 in time for the afternoon business session. Second, Secondly, we know that some of us had difficulty downloading the updated resolutions on the app. Many of you may have noticed when you got up this morning that you had an instruction to sync your devices to the Synod's app. If that did not happen, I just would like to remind us all that if you open the Synod app, access Synod Business, look for the icon, which really is a line of text that is a hot link that says resolutions as recommended by the Synod Committee. That should help us know that the General Synod Planning Committee is working on increasing bandwidth, and that we really welcome your feedback as we try to deal with some of the technical difficulties that we had. I would ask that Speak Out take a moment and relax. I got a little ahead of myself. There is a sponsor that we want to thank first, and that is the large screen that I would draw our attention to for a word for our sponsor, Chicago Theological Seminary.
I guide wilderness trips that are designed to give people a dose of spiritual sustenance. CTS draws people who are doing a variety of beautiful things to make the world a better place to live.
You can get a seminary education in Birmingham, Alabama, but you can't get a progressive seminary education. CTS is a place where you learn what the Bible says, but you also learn that you need to know what it means.
Chicago Theological Seminary is radically different, pushing the status quo to stand with people who society may say are dirty and say God loves them.
CTS expanded my horizons, how to think about God, how to think about ministry. Ministry can be in settings that are nothing like churches.
CTS is preparing students for the next Great Awakening, Reformation, and emergence of new communities of faith that will be transformative in a very progressive, diverse, fluid America.
Thank you, CTS, for your generous support of Synod. Now it's time for another Speak Out opportunity. We will begin with our first speaker. I recognize the speaker at microphone 5.
Joanne Marchetto, Penn Northeast Conference. Those of us gathered from the Penn Northeast Conference would like to roast our esteemed conference minister,
the notorious Bishop Alan C. Miller, a.k.a. Allie, Legs, and Al the Kitty's pal.
We would like to thank him for his nose-picking, his bad golf games, for the demerits in our ministry files, and his colorful metaphors.
We thank you for the many practical jokes, long-winded stories that you tell over and over and over and over again. Terrible cliches and wonderful sense of humor.
We love you and thank you for 15 wonderful years of love and support for the people of the Penn Northeast. You are in our hearts and prayers, and we wish you all the best in your retirement with your awesome, amazing, beautiful, better half, Candy.
I recognize the next speaker at microphone 5.
I'm Alice Foltz from the Columbia UCC Partnership. The Columbia government signed a peace accord to its longtime war with the FARC guerrilla group earlier this year in historic negotiations in Havana, Cuba. Our Columbia ministry partners are key to this peace, and they continue to work hard for healing and reconciliation. Yet, one of the leaders of civil society in Colombia, through one of our friends, Sembrando Paz, remains in a Colombia prison. Jorge Montes is a tireless worker to bring communities together for development. He was arrested in 2013 following a peace march. The UCC Columbia Partnership asks that you sign a petition for his release. Text Jorge, Jorge, to 52886 or sign the petition at the Justice and Witness display. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker at microphone 5.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm Linda Messler, Vice Moderator and Delegate of the Massachusetts Conference of the UCC. Love of children, love of neighbor, and love of creation comprise the three great loves underpinning our vision. Is there anyone here who would deny that love of creation comes to our awareness due in large measure to years of brilliant, committed, intentional work of Reverend Jim Antal, President of the Massachusetts Comet, to combat climate change? We of the Massachusetts Conference invite you to recognize Jim's loving service to the cause of environmental justice for all of God's creation.
Thank you. Speaker at microphone 5.
I am Davita Foy Crabtree from Connecticut and a new trustee of Andover Newton Theological School. I rise to raise before the Synod the issue of how we will support and sustain our seminaries into the future. In a time like this, my friends, in a time when this nation and this world is in all the trouble it is critically important that we support our seminaries, because it is out of the seminaries that come the leaders who will form the spiritual communities and the justice communities that will move us forward. And if our churches and our people are not supporting our seminaries, then we are all in deep trouble. It is theological education that will make the difference for the future of this nation and this world. Get out there and support. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaker at microphone 5.
Rev Dele, Central Atlantic Conference. I'm speaking on behalf of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. Water is life. That water in the inner harbor flows into the Chesapeake Bay, that flows to the Atlantic Ocean 150 miles away along the coast of Virginia. The watershed begins in upstate New York, flows to Delaware, over to Pennsylvania, down to Maryland, D.C., Virginia, and West Virginia. It is our country's largest estuary and a national treasure that we trashed. 50 years ago, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation was formed to redeem the bay. And then the EPA passed the Clean Water Act, and together we have made progress. This year, tests show the water is cleaner than in 30 years. There's underwater grass, crabs and oysters have a record harvest, and there are no oxygen-dead zones. But the current administration wants to stop the work by cutting the EPA budget from $73 million to zero. That's only $4 a person. The 230,000 members of the Chesapeake Bay Foundation is speaking out against
Thank you. Thank you. Recognize the speaker in microphone 5.
Good morning. I'm Gail Kinney from the New Hampshire Conference. If you care about justice, if you care about bringing about a just world, I urge you, I implore you to stop by the Justice and Witness Ministries booth at 5 p.m. today. Even if your appointed rounds are busy, just stop by to start. We're going to be having a brief conversation about building an economic justice movement within the United Church of Christ. And I want to give a shout out to all my brothers and sisters who have already begun to have this conversation about building an economic justice movement. And I would say again, for a just world, for a just country, for a just denomination. We need not just words, not just this moment, we need a movement. So 5 p.m. today, please stop by the Justice and Witness Ministries booth and say, I am in, I am part of this movement. 5 p.m. today, JWM booth for justice.
Thank you. Speaker at microphone 5.
Hi, my name is Dorian Ortega. I'm representing the Council for Hispanic Ministries. I'm also president of our Latinx Ministries of the Great Lakes region. I'm here to speak out on behalf of not only my region, but my local church, Primera Iglesia Congregacional de Chicago, First Congregational Church of Chicago. So I'm here to speak out, to shout out and also uplift the United Church of Christ and its support for its long-standing support for the release of Puerto Rican political prisoners. Primera Iglesia, my local church in Chicago, has a long history of radical politics and progressive support for the release of Puerto Rican political prisoners. In 1980, we, along with the United Church of Christ, was able to release 16 political prisoners. And in 2017, January, President Obama released our last Puerto Rican political prisoner, Oscar Lopez Rivera. He was in prison for about 34 years, and for his support for the Puerto Rico to be.
Thank you. Speaker at microphone 5.
Jody Batten, church planter, Traverse City, Michigan, New Waves United Church of Christ, and a Michigan delegate representative. At our Sunday caucus, my friend and colleague, the Reverend Dr. Deb Conrad, pastor of Woodside UCC, Flint, Michigan, was giving an update on the situation in her community. She shared a lament with us that I thought important to share with the wider church. These are her words. I always appreciate coming to General Synod because I can get connected with great resources and groups doing the church's justice work. I found in the exhibit hall the table for the organization that wants to take away marriage rights from gay people and how to find a congregation near me where these people aren't welcome, plus a contact person in my area. But I wonder if you can help me. I cannot find a similar table where I can get information about pulling back civil rights for Black folks. Does anyone know which table I should visit?
Thank you, speakers. The next Speak Out will be this afternoon during plenary. The sign-up for that Speak Out will be immediately following this plenary. Please see Ken Daniel to sign up, and I want to thank all of our speakers for understanding the time. Sue Art and I also feel the clock always running against us to get as much business before you as we can. This morning we welcome to the stage. We recognize microphone 5 for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. My name is Frank Bolden. I'm the chair-elect of the Board of Directors of United Church of Christ. And I rise to share with you something that kept me awake last night. This has been a fantastic Senate. Yesterday, we were really, really thrilled with all the speakers, all of the worship, and I thought that I'd get a good night's rest. But in the middle of the night, I could not sleep because I kept thinking about that exchange that occurred when we were voting on the allocations for the board from the endowment for the next 2 years. It seems that some people thought that we were dealing with a budget. We were not dealing with a budget. And the board tried to make sure that all of the information needed to vote on that matter was presented. The budget is handled by the board because the budget cycles don't jibe with the Senate meetings. Any information that we deliberate on at the board meetings that members of the public would like to see is available online or can be available online. Transparency is one of the principles that the board tries to use to do its work, and we will continue to do that. But I couldn't sleep last night because I thought about that disconnect and we'll be working on trying to make sure that that doesn't happen again. We will strive to make sure that anything we're asking the Senate to vote on is clear and you have all the information you need to make that decision. And if there are any information that you need, let us know, and if we can provide it, we certainly will. Thank you very much.
Frank, I knew you were coming. I just wasn't sure when, and I was looking down. I don't know how I could miss someone taller than me. But the reason you were up last night is because you're a man of conscience with broad shoulders, And I believe this Senate appreciates not only your care, but your diligence in following through on everything that you've promised. Our second theological reflector, Raven Rose, is a chaplain with St. Luke's Hospital, Unity Point in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. In her role as chaplain, she is specifically assigned to work in the behavioral health and chemical dependency units. Raven is currently seeking ordination with the United Church of Christ, having completed the Master of Divinity at Chicago Theological Seminary in May of 2016. She continues to seek further education and certification in these areas of expertise. Her passions are queer inclusion and queer theology, and she's very passionate about gender issues, especially related to gender non-binary and gender non-conforming. Please welcome Raven.
Good morning, church. Just so those of you who may not know, they're actually not cheering for me. This is Finger Puppet Jesus, and as promised, he is now on the Jumbotron. Finger Puppet Jesus has been on a long discernment journey with me. So good morning, church. Let us start with prayer. And specifically, let us start with this prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, come. Come, Holy Spirit, come. Now, before my experience at seminary, where I attended Chicago Theological Seminary, I had always assumed that the magical words for the institution of the sacrament of communion was the narrative part of the Last Supper. So we all know the words. On the night of his betrayal, Jesus gathered with his disciples in an upper room, said, "Take this and remember." Now, I had always assumed that those were the words that contain the power and potential of the communion sacrament. Later on in seminary, I came to understand that the actual words of institution are the words that come after the narrative part of the communion Last Supper narrative. The words, "Come, Holy Spirit, come," words like it. That is a Holy Spirit infusing prayer. It is the prayer that we say to infuse the ordinary things to become extraordinary, those elements that are laid before us. These are the words that I invite you, the church, to say with me today. Come, Holy Spirit, come. Come, Holy Spirit, come. One more time. Come, Holy Spirit, come. And a third, because three are magical. Come, Holy Spirit, come. Blessings.
Thank you, Raven. She has invoked my favorite prayer as well. Come, Holy Spirit, come. And friends, whenever I'm up against a wall and know not where to go, that's where I go. So say it again with me, please. Come, Holy Spirit, come. Not that we're up against a wall right now. Friends, I have 2 points to share with you before we get into the voting. The first is the voting devices. Remember yesterday when we had a little bit of trouble when it would show 000% on the voting outcome? Yes? Remember? That's not a function of the voting device. That's a function of PowerPoint taking the information and getting it sent back out onto the screen for us to see. So I'm making the distinction that the voting devices are actually working well, but the graphical interface that we have to try to project it is a little fluky at times. So trust that the voting devices are still working, and we'll hope that PowerPoint does a better job today, okay? So that's number one. Number two, Friday night in our first opening plenary, an issue was brought to the attention of the floor about the diversity, particularly the disability diversity on the board of directors. And I do have some commentary for you on that, having checked with our general counsel and other good folk. The nominating committee, which you will vote on this morning in a few minutes, but the nominating committee which nominated this current slate that you will vote on for our board of directors. Nominating committee is charged with ensuring adherence to the UCC commitment to diversity of the slate for the board of directors, and in fact for all the slates that they staff. So the nominating committee is the one that we invest with that responsibility, and they are a committee of the board. The nominating committee then does not disclose disability or sexual orientation or any other private information that they do indeed gather to make their selections, but they don't disclose it. So they do have the information to ensure that the appropriate board compensation, as required by our bylaws, has been achieved. The individuals nominated for any position on the board are free themselves to disclose whatever particularity they choose to disclose, but the nominating committee will not disclose that. So with that now being said, we will move into the elections for the various offices for the United Church of Christ. First, we come to the election of members to the United Church Board of Directors. You are electing 12 members, which is a third of the at-large membership. Now, the names and the biographies of these nominees, which were selected by the General Synod Nominating Committee, have been posted for delegate review since February. The motion to elect these individuals comes from the committee, the nominating committee of the General Synod, and requires no second. So friends, you've been introduced to it. It is now time to vote. So pick up your clickers. And all in favor of electing the slate of candidates submitted by the nominating committee, press 1 on your device. Those opposed, press 2. And those who wish to abstain, press 3. The voting starts now. There we go. PowerPoint didn't let us down. There we go. 90% passage. And you have your elected, the new slate of officers or for the board of directors. Congratulations to them all. Thank you. And we shall now consider the nominees for election to the General Synod Nominating Committee. In this case, you are electing 5 members to the nominating committee, all nominated by the board of directors, acting as the Synod Business Committee on the advice of the Special Committee on Selection. The names and biographies of these 5 fine individuals and members of the United Church of Christ have also been posted, this time since March. The motion comes from a committee of the General Synod and receives no second, so we are now ready to vote. All in favor of electing the slate of candidates submitted by the Business Committee, press 1 on your voting device. Those opposed, press 2. Those who wish to abstain, press 3. Voting starts now. In 15 seconds. Very good. The slate of candidates is elected. Congratulations to them all. We move now to the election of our next moderator of the 32nd General Synod. It was the stated intent of the writers of the new governance structure that there would be a graduation of leadership in this position, that the assistant moderator from one biennium would then move up and be elected, or at least submitted for election, as moderator for the next biennium. And that is how I came to be moderator of this synod. Accordingly, the General Synod Nominating Committee has selected Mr. Norman Williams for election as moderator of the 32nd General Synod. All in favor of electing Mr. Williams as moderator of the 32nd General Synod, please press 1 on your voting device. Those who oppose, press 2. Those who abstain, press 3. And voting starts now. Congratulations, Norm. And the nominee for assistant moderator of the 32nd General Synod is the Reverend Penny Lowes of Rochester, Michigan. There we go. Again, this nominee comes from a committee of the General Synod and requires no second. All in favor of electing Reverend Penny Lowes as assistant moderator of the 32nd General Synod, please press 1 on your voting device. Those opposed, press 2, and those who wish to abstain, press 3. Voting starts now. Very good. And Penny Lowes is elected assistant moderator of the 32nd General Synod. Congratulations, Penny. Everyone will have the opportunity to meet Penny later in Synod when she and Norman are installed in their positions on Tuesday afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue, and this is just how fast they put you to work. We now return to our committee reports. The first committee to report out will be the supplementary Constitution and bylaw amendment, and it will be the Ordained Ministry and Ecclesiastical Oversight Plenary. Our next piece of business will be the consideration of amendments related to ordained ministry and ecclesiastical oversight. Here once again to present the amendments are Mr. Geoff Brace, Chair of the Governance Committee of the United Church of Christ Board of Directors. Catch your breath.
My apologies. I did not realize that was going to come up first. So I need a moment to pull up my motions. How's everybody doing? I'm ready. Moderator, I move the adoption of the proposed amendments to the United Church of Christ Constitution and bylaws related primarily to the ordained ministry and ecclesiastical oversight amendments. These changes are found predominantly in lines 76 through 325 of the document entitled Constitution, Proposed 2017 Amendments, and predominantly in lines 17 through 425 of the document entitled Bylaws, proposed amendments, both of which were provided pursuant to Article 13 of the United Church of Christ Constitution via the General Synod website.
The motion comes from a committee and does not require a second. Mr. Brace, would you like to speak to the motion?
I would, thank you. Most of the amendments proposed in this instance were developed in consultation with the Office of Ministerial Excellence, Support, and Authorization, a term that has taken me 4 years to learn. They largely include editorial changes to terms such as ordained minister, standing, ordained ministerial partner, and local church, in which we capitalize these terms since they are words with significant meaning in the life of our beloved church. Additionally, there are changes to terms substituting those terms which have become accepted terminology in our language: ecclesiastical oversight and denominational support as preferred language. Finally, the board incorporated gender-neutral language into these amendments. I would like to make a special note about these particular amendments. They are being proposed in this vote and are not related to the changes being proposed or considered for the new Manual on Ministry. The Manual on Ministry functions as guidelines for associations to adopt for committees on ministry. The amendments to the Constitution and bylaws do not make any changes to how committees on ministry function. Changes to the Manual on Ministry will eventually require amendments to the Constitution and bylaws, but those amendments will not come before General Synod until 2019 at the earliest. Our practice is for associations to live into the Manual on Ministry long enough before changing the Constitution and bylaws. The Board of Directors of the United Church of Christ supports the adoption of these amendments and requests your affirmative vote.
Thank you. The motion is before the House. The floor is now open for discussion. This is a good time to remind all of us that microphones 1 and 2 are green for those who wish to speak in favor of a motion. Microphones 3 and 4 are coded red to speak against a motion. Microphones 5 and 6, we would advise that you seek guidance from the floor parliamentarian to either have a point of personal privilege or to make an amendment to a motion. I recognize the speaker at microphone 3.
My name is Paul Lance from the Michigan Conference. It has to do with the change in terminology from our church's wider mission to denominational support, which is found in paragraph 230 in the bylaws. In the work we did last night in changing the patterns of giving in the ecology of generosity, we were assured in the document that, and I will quote, "While our church's wider mission, basic support will continue to be the foundation of funding as an enduring commitment to our covenantal relationships, we need to build on this foundation," etc. If the language says we will continue to have our church's wider mission, I'm concerned that we're eliminating the language from our bylaw. And also in that same document on page 12, they had a donor chart, and the dotted line said basic support dollars would continue to flow from the donor to a local church to the wider work of a UCC.
Thank you. Seeing no further speakers lined up, I interpret that we are ready to take action on this motion. If that is the case, I would call your attention to your clickers. Remember, to vote in favor of the motion, you would press number 1, against the motion, number 2, and to abstain, number 3. If you're ready to vote, voting starts now. The amendment is adopted. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item is a resolution of witness in support of legislation authorizing aid in dying. I would call the chair of the committee, Elliot Munn, to the podium to speak.
Voice, granted voice, that person. Good morning, General Synod. My name is Elliot Munn, and I am the associate pastor at First Church in West Hartford, Connecticut. I served as the chair of Committee 15, reviewing the resolution of witness in support of legislation authorizing aid in dying. You can find the resolution as amended in your app. Death is a topic that touches each of us personally. As we embarked on wrestling with this medical aid in dying resolution, we made time for sharing stories. We heard stories of those who bravely faced death, stories of committed loved ones who sat with them, and stories of highly skilled physicians providing compassionate care. We also heard stories of those who watched their loved ones die, excruciating deaths. Stories of the terminally ill who ended their lives by violent means because more humane options were not available. We made space for these stories while also dealing directly with the specifics of the resolution. We made a list of questions and concerns on newsprint and went through each question and concern individually. The committee paid special attention to how this resolution would affect the poor, racial minorities, and people living with disabilities. Those familiar with this legislation assured us that participation in medical aid in dying programs is totally voluntary. They also assured us that there is no data in states that have passed such legislation reflecting disproportionately large participation by these constituencies. Although there was not unanimous agreement on this resolution, we did come to a broad consensus. An overwhelming majority supported the spirit of this resolution. The amendments we have suggested accentuate elements that were already present in the text of the resolution. The committee added wording to emphasize that medical aid in dying is self-administered and not forced on patients. They emphasize that we should focus our energy on a state-by-state basis and removed language encouraging the District of Columbia to enact legislation since they have already done so. They also called upon the national staff to continue curating resources on this topic. On behalf of Committee 15, I move that the 31st General Synod adopts the resolution of witness in support of legislation authorizing aid in dying and recommend approval as amended by the committee.
This is a resolution of witness, comes from a committee and requires no second. This is the only business item that this committee is bringing forth. Does the committee wish to speak to the motion?
I do. During our educational intensive, our presenter framed the issue of medical aid in dying as balancing patient autonomy with our imperative to protect the vulnerable. This resolution seeks to both facilitate death with dignity while also creating guidelines to assure that it is carried out responsibly. We appreciated the targeted precision of this resolution. It lays out 4 clear criteria to craft legislation that promotes dignity and autonomy in death. This resolution outlines 4 explicit guidelines for a patient to qualify for this program. 1, the patient has a medically diagnosed, terminally debilitating illness or condition. 2, has a medical prognosis of death within 6 months. 3, is legally competent to make medical decisions. And 4, is expressing a voluntary and personal choice to die. In the Gospel of John, Jesus declares, "I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." As we heard medical data and stories, a strong majority of us discerned death is an inevitable season of life and deserves honor and fullness that we give to other seasons. This resolution supports the choice of the terminally ill to voluntarily end their life in consultation with their doctor. In a time in which technology can keep us alive without consideration for quality of life, it supports the terminally ill having the choice to pass with dignity. The Gospel of Matthew reads, "When Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless." This resolution is our opportunity for prophetic witness, to boldly proclaim to our local churches and the general public God's compassion for the dying. It also exhorts the national staff to advocate for this vulnerable population with state legislation in accordance with the aforementioned guidelines. I implore you to lend your support to this resolution that so succinctly protects the autonomy and holistic well-being of the terminally ill. Mr. Moderator, we also have a visitor, Mr. Dan Diaz, whose personal story is relevant to the business matter. I ask he be given voice. After?
Without objection, I declare that this gentleman be granted voice on this matter. I will recognize the speaker at microphone 1 and 2 and then 6. Microphone 1.
Yes, hi, my name is John White of the Massachusetts Conference. I was asked to be the spirit listener for our group. This is what I heard. I care about life. Life is sacred. I care about Scripture. I care about mercy. I care about an end to suffering and personal autonomy. I care about wrestling with deeply difficult questions such as, is life or love the highest moral priority? I care about the homeless. I even care about insurance. Most of all, I care about the intersection of all I care about with personal stories. When my story is laid upon the stories of Scripture, mercy is heard, love is heard, and Jesus, who speaks with radical ideas about love to me and to all, is heard through the embodiment of our lives. So while it is difficult, and perhaps because it's difficult, I support this resolution with deepest love in support of every life.
Thank you. Microphone 2.
Corinne Eskridge, Connecticut Conference. I was assigned to the committee that addressed this resolution, and I entered the room knowing very little about the issue of medical aid in dying, and I left now as an advocate here and in the future. I'm convinced that this legislation that this resolution supports effectively balances the personal autonomy of patients and protections on multiple levels for the vulnerable. In the 19 years that medical aid in dying has been legal in Oregon, which was the first state to enact it, there has not been a single case of abuse either there or in any of the other 4 states in the District of Columbia that have enacted it since. What has happened is that mercy and grace has been extended to around 1,700 individuals just in Oregon alone, who were able to make informed and personal end-of-life decisions, allowing them to truly be at peace. I urge my fellow delegates to approve the resolution and support offering this merciful option to those who desire it.
Thank you. ask microphone 6 to be patient. I'm really required to give both 2 in favor and 2 opposing opinions before I recognize an amendment. So microphone 4.
My name is Bob Thompson. I am from the Southern Conference. It's interesting that the UCC's own statistical analysis is that if the patterns of the last 30 years continue the next 30 years, we will be a denomination of 200,000 instead of our current 900,000. There are a lot of multi-layered and complex reasons for that, but one of them is that folks who are more on the evangelical or conservative or orthodox or traditional side feel that General Synod often takes positions sort of in the cutting edge of progressive thinking, and they feel very much left behind and feel the denomination does not represent them. I can tell you that of all the resolutions that have been presented to this General Synod, I've heard more concern about this one than any of the others from those folks. I represent an organization, Faithful and Welcoming Churches, that encourage them to stay and to give and to participate, but resolutions like this make it very difficult for them. So I ask you to vote no just out of compassion and concern for those to whom passing this resolution would bring another level of pain about their denomination.
Thank you. I recognize speaker in microphone 3.
I'm Reverend Kelly Parrish Lucas, delegate with UCCDM. I'm a clergy woman with disabilities, and I'm also a hospice chaplain. I've thought a lot about this issue. It is part of my work in California as a hospice chaplain. And I have 2 serious concerns about this resolution. The first is the medications used in physician-assisted death. The laws do not require that medication to be disposed of if the person does not use it, which more than often is the case. And then we have medication that's deadly floating around the community. This resolution also leaves no space for those of us who are theologically opposed to say we don't want to be involved. Vote no, please.
Thank you. I recognize the speaker in microphone 6.
Good morning. Paul Fogel with Disability Ministries, and I hail from the Great Penn Central Conference, and I have an amendment to the resolution. I believe that's how it's done.
Yes.
Should I read it?
Shall I? You should read it, yes.
Libby, can I have it back?
I have it, so if it would help you, I will read someone else's handwriting. That was why I asked you, but I'll help you if you need me.
Well, I can read it, that's fine. To be inserted between lines 20 and 22, be it further resolved that the 31st General Synod of the United Church of Christ urges all UCC settings to affirm the value and dignity of persons with disabilities and oppose any abuse of end-of-life laws as a means of promoting euthanasia for people with disabilities.
Is there a second?
I'm Allison McHenry from the Iowa Conference, and I second the motion.
You've heard the amendment to the motion. Is there opinions on that amendment?
Do I?
Would you like to speak to the amendment? Microphone 6.
If that's in order, I would.
Yes.
Paul Fogel, UCCDM, and Penn Central Conference. I'll be completely honest with you. I have a mixed review at this resolution. However, my biggest issue with the resolution, I believe this amendment would clarify a lot of things, is people with disabilities do not always lead independent and free lives. There are guardian agreements and other things that they have no control over, and these types of end-of-life laws and provisions that this resolution speaks to can be abused. I can tell you stories, and I'm sure others in the hall here can speak to those types of situations that have touched your lives in one way or another. So I believe this amendment speaks to those situations. Thank you.
Thank you. So the matter before the floor is the amendment to the motion by the committee. Are there opinions on the amendment? Microphone 1. Microphone 2.
Alexander Haynes, South Dakota Conference. When an able-bodied person says that they want to die, society sees that as a tragedy and tries to talk them out of it. When a disabled person says they want to die, society too often says, well, that's okay. This amendment seeks to change the voice of the UCC, that we are not adding our voices to the negative messages that we get from media, that we get from things like the recent film Me Before You, that seems to send the message that a disabled life is a life that is a burden, it is a second-class life, because we as the church believe that there's no such thing as a second-class life, because we as the church believe that every single life is valuable and want to affirm that. Thank you.
If there are no further opinions on the amendment to the motion, I think we would be ready to vote on that amendment. If we are, if you would take clickers in hand. Those in favor of the amendment as stated will vote 1. Those opposed to the amendment, 2. Those wishing to abstain, 3. If you're ready to vote, voting begins now. The amendment has been accepted. It will be inserted between lines 20 and 22 of the motion on the floor. We now return to the matter before us, which is the amendment as brought by the committee. I will recognize microphone 3, 4, and 1. Microphone 3.
I'm Reverend Howard Bell, the Minnesota Conference. I have worked on the Minnesota Hospice Organization. I've opened a hospice in 1978. I want to point out that the criteria in this resolution are equivalent to the criteria to be admitted into hospice care. But hospice care neither hastens death nor prolongs life, but provides for the comfort and symptomatic control of the patient. I believe that if we follow the actions of Jesus, Jesus rose people from the dead. Jesus never hastened death. And I believe this is ethically and theologically against the against the purpose of the United Church of Christ. I do not consider it prophetic. I urge you to oppose this resolution.
Thank you. Microphone 4.
Thank you. My name is Emily Heath. I'm a member of the board of directors. I'm also a local church pastor in New Hampshire. And prior to that, I was both a trauma and a hospice chaplain, which means I've watched a whole lot of folks die. And so I'm very interested in this resolution because I do want people to have deaths that are not painful and that are dignified. But here's the thing, I really want to make sure that voluntary is voluntary. And the thing I heard most as a hospice chaplain from folks is that I don't want to be a burden on my family. I'm really concerned about the state of healthcare in our country. I think that healthcare is going to get a lot more expensive for a lot of folks really soon. And while we are debating what healthcare looks like in our country, I don't want us to take any moves that are going to make any people who might be very financially burdened soon feel like this is a choice that they have to make. So I see this as a justice issue. And so I'd like us to wait until we take a stand on this. I do have theological and ethical problems, but I'm concerned especially about the timing. Thank you.
I recognize microphone 1.
Yes, thank you. My name is Tony Dillon Hansen from the Iowa Conference. And I come to you with the idea that I shared in prayer with my own dad. We walked together through a year of cancer, actually 2 cancers, before he finally passed in November. And on his journey, he kept telling us, I just want to go peacefully. And who are we to stop him? I wanted him, I would love to have him here today. But would it be for me to tell him, you have to take that medicine, you have to continue, you have to? To me, that is his choice, and he made it. He died in his dignity in hospice care. He is Missouri Synod Lutheran and Roman Catholic, so keep that in mind.
Thank you. Microphone 2.
My name is Dan Diaz, and I am Brittany Menard's husband. Brittany died 2 years ago after battling an aggressive brain tumor. She endured an 8-hour brain surgery, and we researched every treatment option that was available to save her life. Unfortunately, the tumor was growing aggressively, and we had to move from California to Oregon so that Brittany could have the option of a gentle passing utilizing their medical aid in dying program. As you heard, being old or being disabled does not qualify a person for this program. Only a person that is terminally ill with 6 months or less to live qualifies. This is a narrowly focused and protective program. It does not result in more people dying. It results in fewer people suffering. The executive director of Disability Rights Oregon states, DRO has still not received a complaint of exploitation or coercion of an individual with disabilities in the use of Oregon's Death with Dignity Act. 70% of the population supports medical aid in dying. If you were in Brittany's predicament, would you at least want to know you have the option for yourself? Thank you.
Thank you. Microphone 6.
Hi, I'm Deborah Duke. I'm the senior pastor at the Community Church of Mountain Lakes and a member of the CIC delegation. I'd like to propose what I think is just a friendly amendment. I noted that in the third "be it resolved" clause, there's no subject. So I'd like to propose that we insert the words that the 31st General Synod of the United Church of Christ, between the bolded "be it further resolved" and the word "requests."
Is there a second to that motion?
I'm David McDonald from the Wisconsin Conference. David McDonald. I second the motion.
Thank you. You've heard the friendly amendment to the motion that is on the floor. Are there any discussion on the amendment? We must consider the amendment first. So any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, I interpret that we're ready to vote on the amendment as it was put before us. If so, if you'll take your clickers in hand as we're ready to go to vote. Those in favor of the amendment will vote 1. Those opposed, 2. Those abstaining, 3. Voting begins now. That amendment has been accepted. Let us now return to the main motion as has been amended. I will try to recognize going forward both a positive and then a negative opinion in that order. I recognize microphone 3.
Good morning. My name is Reverend Jen Macy from the Massachusetts Conference. And more than once in my life, I have met criteria for medical aid in dying. Living with a progressive and eventually terminal condition is terrifying, painful, and unpredictable. And when I was in unbearable pain and I didn't have hope that my life was worth living or my body would be worthy of that life, I wanted someone to help me die. But instead of receiving that help to die, I received mental health counseling, love from my family, empowerment from my pastor, and hope from my church, and I am alive. I am not healed, and life is not painless, but I have life, and I have it abundantly. I am a wife and a mother and a pastor because those that loved me and my church chose not to look away from my pain. They did not take my pain and see it as redemptive, but nor did they say it was meaningless. I had witness and companions who helped me make compassionate, reasonable, and reversible medical decisions. As I continue my journey with this disease, I need the church. I don't need the theology in this resolution. It is dangerous and harmful to me and people living and dying like me, and I ask that you vote no.
Thank you. Recognize microphone 1.
Hello, my name is Linda Hammond. I'm from the Pennsylvania Southeast Conference. I have a question to the chair of the committee. When you were giving the requirements, the 4 requirements, I didn't hear you mention 18. They had to be 18 years or older, which was in the original amendment. Can you clarify and confirm if there is an age requirement remaining in your resolution?
I'd feel like it would be best if the proponents of this resolution, the sponsoring, could speak to this.
I'm not sure I heard you, but if I did, I'll recognize microphone 4.
I'm Barry Jacobson from the New Hampshire Conference. Reverend Tracy talked about how God takes binaries and turns them into spectrums. We're about to have to make a yes or no decision, basically. But I want to just take a spectrum moment. I've felt undecided on this all the way through. As a pastor, my general experience has been that people in hospice care get very good and even aggressive assistance with having a gentle dying. I am very moved by Dan's story of Brittany, and I am paying attention to it. I am paying attention to the claim that there are conditions of dying that are not relieved by the medical procedures that I'm familiar with and that require more aggressive assistance with dying. But here's the color on the spectrum that I just want to focus on for a second. That is the color green. Insurance companies make an enormous amount of money by making sure that a $500 cup solution wins out over a much more expensive one. We have to be vigilant about that.
Thank you. Microphone 2.
Hello, I'm Reverend Micah Royal from the Southern Conference. I'm a hospice chaplain. I work every day with the dying and sick. A few years ago, everyone in the conference saw me bury my wife, who'd been in painful agony for many years, living bravely and beautifully with a disability that she never treated and I never treated as a problem. One of the most haunting texts in Scripture says they prayed for death and it would not come. And I see that every day. People in horrible pain. The hospice medicine does what it can, who wish that they could pass in my state. And I think we need to trust people's wisdom and their families and their doctors to be able to make these decisions. You're inflicting pain and cost and agony on individuals and families if you vote against allowing this freedom. And I think that the body needs to know that. I see that every day, as many others do.
Thank you. Recognize microphone 5.
Hi, my name is John Zangari from the Penn Northeast Conference. I want to add a point of clarification, or ask for a point of clarification from the question that was posed at microphone number 1. As it stands right now within the current amended resolution, which I have in my hand, it says that the current 4 terms of being able to have a medical aid in dying would be as, quote, number 1, having a medically diagnosed terminal illness or condition. Number 2, has medical prognosis of death within 6 months. 3, is legally competent to make a medical decisions. And 4, is expressing a voluntary and personal choice to die. So, and I just want to make the clarification or ask if this is finalized, as it was brought up that it was possible that within it was that you'd have to be 18 years old to make this. As it stands, it doesn't seem like that. Is that correct from the committee chair?
My interpretation of this resolution and of all of the other pieces of legislation that have been passed statewide is that to be a to make a competent legal medical decision such as this, one has to be an adult 18 years old.
Thank you. Recognize microphone 3.
Linda Messler from the Massachusetts Conference. Let us not put a period where God has put a comma. I inherited my hazel eyes from my father, my temperament from one grandmother, and debilitating and for them fatal heart disease from my grandmother and my mother. Now, when I received a diagnosis in my early 20s of this same fatal heart disease, my family could not bear up under it, and they could not walk the walk with me. And it was not a pretty walk. But I had the love and support of my church. And though there were times when the clock was ticking and the doctors told me what would happen next, and indeed it did, that I thought, well, this is inevitable. But what I had that previous generations didn't have is...
Thank you. Recognize microphone 1.
Ethan Drutchess from the Michigan Conference. I just wanted to broach an issue that was raised earlier with the gentleman from the Southern Conference. There was a suggestion that this view is somehow affirming the right of individuals to die is somehow unorthodox or an example of something sort of a flavor of the week kind of issue. And I just wanted to remind us and point out that it is a deep aspect of the Christian theological tradition, going back even to the patristic period, that with that there oftentimes that pardon me, that as opposed to we talking about sanctity of life, we need to be talking about reverence for life. And basically, reverence means that we respect the decisions of individuals to express their autonomy over their lives, and that there are things that are in fact worse than dying, and one of those is losing that autonomy. Thank you.
Thank you. After I recognize speaker at microphone 4, we have exceeded the amount of time allotted to a committee, so I will at that point ask the body if we would like to continue debate or if we're ready to go to make our decision on this motion. So microphone 4.
Eliza Bachakjian, 280 New Hampshire Conference. I am not theoretically in opposition to the motion. I am not in opposition to an individual's autonomy. I am very concerned, however, that there is no language in this motion that recognizes that we live in a culture that not only perpetuates but often justifies institutional bias. I'm very concerned that we don't seem to be listening to the voices of those who are very concerned about how this would impact upon them, those from the disabilities ministries, for instance. We know that legislation is not necessarily applied equally across all demographics of our culture or our society, and I would like to see more and stronger language that reflects that within this motion.
Thank you. Is it the will of the body that we continue this discussion, or is there a motion to end debate on this matter? You'd have to go to the microphone. I can't hear you from here. While you're thinking about that, I'll recognize the speaker at microphone 2.
Dr. Don Nichols of the Ohio Conference.
I think all of us want to have every safeguard against someone's life being taken from them by some authority outside of themselves. I have lost 2 wives to cancer, one a bowel cancer where she suffered for 4 years with nothing going through hardly, and died a miserable death in Ann Arbor. My other wife, Sally, who just died 7 years ago, had a condition of the esophagus, and she expired from that condition indirectly with a serious infection. Neither one of those women wanted to die, but they knew that it was time. I think we grant the dignity, we give everybody else a choice in everything. Why aren't we giving people a choice in this matter for themselves?
Thank you. Recognize the speaker in microphone 6.
Good morning, Reverend Marilyn Pagan Banks with the Illinois Conference, and I call the question.
Is there a second?
My name is John Zingari, Penn Northeast Conference. I second.
The question has been called. The motion now to vote on is to end debate and then vote on the motion on the floor. If it is your desire that we call the question and end debate, I would ask that you vote 1. If you wish to extend this debate, vote 2. If you wish to abstain, vote 3. Voting begins now. They have an answer, but you're laughing with me. Yesterday when this happened, we were at the table just talking about how well the system was working, and then it stopped. We have agreed to end debate. The votes has to be more than just these, but the numbers of voting clearly end debate. We will go to the main motion as it has been amended twice. Oh, percents, I'm sorry. The percentages, which I would share with you because they would be on the screen, is 63% were for ending debate, 33% against ending debate, and 4% abstaining. Thank you. So we're going to vote on the motion with both amendments. If you are in favor of the motion, please vote 1. If you are against the motion, vote 2. If you wish to abstain, vote 3. I feel the need that because of the nature of the motion and its sensitivity that there be no applaud, that there are no winners and there are no losers on this matter. Yes, sir?
Matthew Emery, Connecticut Conference. A motion to end debate requires a two-thirds vote.
The chair thanks you for having better math than I do. We will continue debate. The chair recognizes microphone 3.
Hi, I'm Reverend Ellen Rowan Ball of the Massachusetts Conference. I'm also a physical therapist, and I sit on ethics committees. I have, in the last few years, buried my mother and buried my father-in-law, both in hospital systems where things had advanced to the point where hospitalists and highly trained palliative care professionals were able to advise us in order to provide death with dignity. I am greatly frightened as a health professional and I understand at times the tyranny that we present to patients. And I'm greatly afraid of putting medically assisted suicide in the hands of an institutionalized system that can so often go wrong. I'm thinking of the slippery slope that when we begin to institutionalize these things as a church or as a state, that heaven forbid we get to a time when someone's admitted to a hospital and we can be offered a menu of a life or a death plan. I do not feel that's in my gospel.
Thank you. I recognize the speaker at microphone 1.
Hi, Anna Punt, youth delegate from Wisconsin. My great aunt died of a brain tumor, and she knew she was going to die. And this is the woman that taught me how to eat cherries without choking on the pits. She taught me my first yoga pose, and she did die. But the beauty of it was that she got to choose how she died. She chose not to have Aiden dying. She chose to let her disease take its course, but she had the dignity of choosing how she was going to die because she was going to die. And I just think that people need the choice of how that's going to happen if it's going to be inevitable. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair recognizes speaker at microphone 6.
Julie Holm of the Penn Central Conference, pastor of the Brush Valley Fusion of Faith. I would like to propose an amendment to insert after the words adult patient in line 11, paren, at least 18 years of age, close paren. I think it does not hurt to be clear that we are not talking about children.
Thank you. Is there a second to that amendment?
John Zagari, Penn Northeast Conference. I'll second it.
Thank you. Chair recognizes microphone 5.
Good morning. My name is John Loff, and I'm from the Iowa Conference. I would like to call the order of the day. We did not vote to extend discussion. As I understand, time allotted of the committee to continue discussion, that ran out, and we recognize that with all other committees, and we vote on the matter. We voted to call the question, which was voted down, but we did not vote to extend discussion time.
I agree with you. However, I was being advised by the parliamentarians, and so while they're thinking about your wisdom, I'd like to act upon the amendment that has been moved and seconded, which is to insert 18 years of age after adult patient in line 11. Is there any discussion on that amendment? The amendment of 18 years of age to be inserted in line 11. Is number 3? Is that opinion against this amendment?
Yes.
Okay.
I also want to speak against the actual measure, but on the amendment, Scott Jones from Omaha, Nebraska. Nebraska is the only state in the union in which legally you are not an adult until 19 years of age, and so the amendment would violate Nebraska law.
Is the speaker at microphone 4 speaking to the amendment? Microphone 4.
Jane Ryan Kuroiwa, delegate of the Hawaii Conference. It's my understanding that at Synod we are only voting on the be it resolved paragraphs. Line 11 is above that in the whereas clauses.
So You are correct. And so the amendment as presented is point of order at microphone 5.
Matt McCaffrey, Connecticut Conference. The previous speaker called the amendment not germane because it was in the whereases. It actually is in the be it resolved clauses. Line 11.
You're correct. I was given wrong information. It's still in order.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
The amendment is still before us. It has not been ruled out of order. Are there any opinions on this last amendment? Seeing none, if you're ready to vote on this amendment, please take your clickers. In favor, vote 1. Opposed, press 2. Abstain, press 3. Voting begins now. My guess would be that while we're waiting on those numbers on this amendment, we might try a voice vote on that. It is very short. It is simply the insertion of 18 years of age. Oh. It was a tie, so the amendment fails. It was 45% for, 45% against, 10% abstain. We are back then on the point of order that was raised as to whether or not, because on the rules of the Senate, we've already extended this time, and we did have a motion to call the question, which failed. There was no motion to extend debate. Do the parliamentarians have a ruling on that? I think what would be in order would be, after I recognize the point of order in microphone 5, then I will ask another question. Microphone 5.
Mike Denton, Conference Minister of the Pacific Northwest Conference. Percentages do not indicate number of votes.
That's true.
So if you have 45%, there can still be different numbers of votes within those 45% if it's rounding up.
It does require a 50%, though, and until we get this straight, we have to kind of live with it.
But as we're talking about the numbers of votes, that might be helpful as far as we're trying to get the indication of the feeling of the room.
I understand we'll be able to get those as well. In the meantime, it seems to be prudent that we follow the request of the point of order that requested that we take your opinion as Senate on whether or not we wish to extend debate. Microphone 5.
Bob Thompson, Southern Conference. I checked with the floor parliamentarian, and I think you need a ruling on whether 45%, if there are actually more votes one way or the other, is actually a majority. The abstentions don't count, so you just need a majority of those who actually voted.
The numbers were 301 voted yes, 303 voted no, 69 abstained. Is there a motion to extend debate on this matter? You can't move it from there. Go to mic 6.
Scott Jones, Nebraska Conference. I move that we extend debate.
Is there a second?
Megan Berkowitz, Massachusetts Conference. I second.
As much as I hate to do this, we're going to try the clickers again. Motion to extend debate. Is microphone 3 against that motion? Okay. So seeing no opinion on the motion to extend debate, all in favor will vote 1 for extending debate, 2 against that motion, 3 to abstain. Voting begins now. While technology resolves itself, I will, in the meantime, believe I have left with microphone 2, and then I'll go over on this side. Microphone 2. Microphone 2.
I am Reverend Jessica Chapman from the Southern California Nevada Conference. I serve as a hospital chaplain in the state of California, and in our state for the past year, our doctors have the ability to prescribe aid of dying medication. And as a chaplain on the palliative care team, I have the privilege of being a part of conversations where doctors have the courage, and it's not easy for doctors to have this conversation, but where doctors have the courage to offer this option to our patients, and who through this option find great relief and great comfort in knowing they no longer must suffer with their terminal illness. I believe this option, and it's only an option, should be available to all people who deeply suffer and grieve their terminal illnesses. Thank you.
Thank you. The motion to extend debate has failed. There were 203 votes in favor, 470 votes against, 17 votes in abstention. I'll call now the order of the day. We will move now to vote on the motion as amended on the floor. As you remember, the motion had amendments. We've discussed it enough that I think it's all before us. It's sensitive. Those now in favor of the motion will vote 1. Those against the motion, 2. Those abstaining will vote 3. Voting begins now. If I thought the clickers were at fault, that would work. I'm sure you can't read it because I can't either. This is a resolution of witness requiring a 2/3 vote. That threshold was not reached. The motion does not pass. Let us not. We want to make sure that we don't regret having made a ruling in error. Abstentions don't count in a vote like this, so they are actually calculating by hand. While they're doing that, let me self-disclose to you that I personally appreciate the manner in which this discussion has taken place. All of us come from various walks of life, various forms of ministry. What many of you probably don't know about me is that I've operated a funeral home for 40 years. And so intimately, I have been trying very hard to just not reveal the emotions building up in me that I'm sharing with you.
Does not pass. It needed 66% without the abstentions.
Without the abstentions, we had 65.09%. It needed 66% to pass, and so the motion does not pass. The next item before us is brought before us by committee number 4.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Reverend Daniel Ross Jones. I'm a member of First Congregational Church, United Church of Christ in Palo Alto, California, and serve in the delegation from the Northern California Nevada Conference. In committee number 4, we worked with a resolution regarding United States and Cuba relations. You can find this resolution as amended in your Synod app. Under Synod Business, tap Resolutions as recommended by the Synod committees and Bring Down the Wall in the Caribbean following. We did amend the title to Bring Down the Wall in the Caribbean, ending the United States embargo on Cuba. Along with a series of other amendments to the original resolution that were passed by the committee, it's followed engaged discussion and a wonderful session of learning in the educational intensive. On behalf of committee number 4, I move that the 31st General Synod of the United Church of Christ adopt the resolution, Bring Down the Wall in the Caribbean, ending the United States embargo on Cuba, and recommend its approval as amended by the committee.
The resolution comes from the committee and requires no second. Would you like to speak to the resolution?
Yes, I would. As I indicated earlier, our discussion was very meaningful. We engaged in a process of active discernment of what the Holy Spirit is calling us to do in response to changes in the structural relationship between the governments of the United States and of Cuba, and the ongoing embargo of Cuba by the United States. Our committee spent a lot of time discussing important questions about relationship, hospitality, connection, and justice. We sought clarity of language while preserving the intent and deeply held Christian love expressed in the original resolution as received, and commissioned a writing team to meet in between sessions of our whole committee in order to achieve that clarity. I want to share and highlight 2 examples of this work that we did. Our committee spent time in this meaningful discussion about passive and active hospitality, about postures of humility against entitlement, and amended our resolution's title in order to better clarify the intent and purpose of the resolution. In this era where physical walls are taking center stage in our discourse, we wanted to ensure that this metaphorical wall, which is no less of an obstacle and division between groups of people, did not get ignored. We appreciated the passionate witness of the resolution's proponent and members of our committee from the submitting Southern Conference, along with invited guests from the church in Cuba, which informed and inspired our discernment. The result is the unanimous recommendation to the Synod to adopt and approve this resolution as amended.
Thank you. The matter is before the House. Is there any opinion on the motion as presented? Microphone number 2.
Edward Davis. I serve as the conference minister of the Southern Conference, bringing down the wall in the Caribbean. According to the biblical narrative in the book of Joshua, the Battle of Jericho was the first battle of the Israelites in their conquest of Canaan. According to Joshua, the walls of Jericho fell after Joshua's army marched around the city, blowing their trumpets. After hosting representatives from Cuba at our annual gathering and listening to their stories and hearing their challenges, and with our United Church of Christ and the Disciples of Christ through Global Ministries launching the Caribbean Initiative, like Joshua, this resolution will be our trumpets blowing to bring down the walls as a statement of our collective faith in the positive future in the relationship with and love for our neighbors in Cuba. Therefore, I stand in support of this resolution.
Thank you. Seeing no additional opinion, if you are ready to vote on the matter, if you'll take your clickers in hand, if you are prepared to support the resolution, you'll vote 1. If you are against the resolution, 2. And if you wish to abstain, 3. I'm going to pray that voting begins now. Not yet. Are you ready? I didn't pray hard enough.
Come, Holy Spirit, come.
Voting really does begin now. Finally, motion passed. It is so ordered. Thank you. In the United Church of Christ, leadership is often collective as it is individual. We believe that the Spirit can be counted on to move and lead through gathered communities as much or more as through individuals. One of the gathered communities which functions as a focus of leadership for the whole of the United Church of Christ is the Council of Conference Ministers. And like all living communities, CCM, as we call themselves, are always changing. It is right and good for us to acknowledge those who have left and who will soon leave, as well as those who have joined us since General Synod last met in Cleveland. Most, but not all of those whose names I will read are with us and will join me here on the platform as I read their names. Recently retired, Walter John Boris from the Central Procure Conference. Though we know that, it's not Walter. Those who we know will complete their ministries before the next General Synod: Charles Buck, Hawaii Conference; Alan Miller, Penn Northeastern Conference; Roddy Duckerson, Nebraska Conference; Rich Pleva, Iowa Conference. We grieve the absence of our colleague John Deckenbach, Central Atlantic Conference, whose untimely death last year still is keenly felt by the entire Conference of Conference Ministers. And then there are those who have joined CCM since last Synod. The following newly serve as settled conference ministers since Synod last met. Kasaba Krasny from the Calvin Synod. Jenny Brown Daniel, the Missouri Mid-South Conference. Edith Guffey, Kansas-Oklahoma Conference. Monica Dawkins Smith, Penn Central Conference. Sue Art, Rocky Mountain Conference. Don Longbottom, South Central Conference. Bill Lyons, Southwest Conference. In addition, there are individuals whose service in our midst is temporary, but who are esteemed as full colleagues during their time serving in this role. Marie Baccolici, Southeast Conference. Chad Abbott, Indiana-Kentucky Conference. Denise Mason Bullitt, Central Atlantic Conference. John Gant, Ohio Conference. Shauna Johnson, Illinois South Conference. Molly Carlson, Central Pacific Conference. Will you please join me in thanking these servants of the United Church of Christ? Which one?
This one, and Jim Antal retiring in a year. Can you say Jim Antal retiring in a year?
No.
Say Jim Antal retires in a year.
Jim?
Jim Antal.
Jim Anton retires in a year.
Jim Antal.
Jim Anton. And who?
And then this Aisa in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Iese.
Iese Tu'uo from the Hawaii Conference will start July 5th and serve until an interim is hired.
And then Bonnie.
And Bonnie Bates, the Penn Northeastern Conference will start September the 1st.
Is that it? Did we get them? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to my dear colleagues.
We still have a lot of work to do, so we're going to move forward. We are now going to hear the report of Committee 9. We would call David Barr to the podium to present their resolution.
My name is David Barr, delegate of the Rocky Mountain Conference, proud of Sue Art, and pastor of Park Hill Congregational Church in Denver. I want to thank members of Committee 9 for their diligent and passionate engagement with the issue before us. You can find it on your app under Synod Business, resolutions recommended by Synod committees halfway down. After discussing a number of areas we would have liked to have strengthened, we did what we could within our polity to direct committees on ministry. We discussed the desire for a targeted implementation date, as in yesterday, but decided that each context has to determine that on their own. We discussed methods such as the need for any training to be relational, as in not web-based, but again, decided each context has to decide that on their own. We discussed a concern for the quality and effectiveness of whatever content may be used, but again, decided each context must determine that on their own. In the second, therefore be it resolved, between lines 101 and 105, we did include a request that MESA collect best practices so that committees on ministry have a place to turn. Perhaps our biggest concern was to stress the need for this to be ongoing, similar to the frequency of boundary training, and we want the resolution to be clear. This is a lifelong commitment. Therefore, the first, therefore be it resolved, lines 95 to 99, we added a comma and the word and the word ongoing. With the unanimous support and on behalf of Committee 9, I move that the 30th General Synod adopts the resolution on establishing procedures for cultural diversity training for authorized ministers and recommend approval as amended.
Thank you. This comes from a committee. It does not require a second. Does the committee wish to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you. A member of our Committee 9 was part of the original association that brought this resolution. Although there have been discussions of requiring cultural diversity training for clergy as long as I can remember, she told us that this particular resolution was developed in the aftermath of yet another young black man, Michael Brown, in Ferguson, Missouri. People ask, what can we do? The memories of Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, Eric Garner, Walter Scott, John Crawford, Tanisha Anderson, Michael Marshall, Philando Castile, and Freddie Gray should never be far from our hearts, mind, soul, and strength as we urge committees on ministry to implement this synod resolution. Our polity cannot direct this, but as a fellow history and polity teacher reminded me, as synod, we can set the ethos, and this matters. We often wonder what impact our synod resolutions actually have on the world, and let me tell you that it matters that 5,000 clergy will be engaged in this work. And as we try to make our pastors woke, the urging that will be that this is an ongoing requirement which will maintain our standing and be a commitment to stay woke. It matters. But you'll have to go home to your associations and conferences to make this happen. So the implementation of this resolution actually relies on you.
Thank you. The matter is before the House. Are there any opinions on the motion? I recognize microphone 1.
Yes, thank you. I'm Margaret Phillip. I serve as a delegate for the Missouri Mid-South Conference, and I am the pastor of St. Thomas United Church of Christ in Chesterfield, Missouri. After Michael Brown's death, I was unable to properly react in the pulpit, mainly because I didn't have the experience of talking about race, and many of our clergy do not. In 1993, this General Synod voted to become a multiracial, multicultural church. After the death of Michael Brown, our brother Starsky Wilson asked, what have we done to become multiracial, multicultural? Well, when we look around this Synod floor today, we know we've come a long way. But when we leave this Synod tomorrow and go home to our local churches, we know that we do not all serve multiracial, multicultural churches. This education is vital to
Thank you. I'll recognize 6 after I've had 2 for and against opinions on the motion. I recognize microphone 3.
My name is David Greenhaw. I'm an associate delegate. I'm the president of Eden Theological Seminary, and I love Margaret Phillip, who's from the Missouri Mid-South Conference, where I am as well. And I found myself at an odd position of wanting to stand and speak against this because there's nothing about this that I find disturbing, except for the trend that it represents. And the trend is that we've made several very important decisions in the General Synod over several generations now about going away from prescribed courses, required curricular courses, establishing requirements. in the belief that just checking off a box is the same thing as education. The underlying commitment of this is that we would in fact have a passion for attending to racial equity and cultural sensitivity in all of our clergy. And this, I couldn't agree with more. It's work that we do all the time and I'm involved in and support. The problem is that if we develop curricula one at a time,
thank you.
This is a difficulty. So am I out of time? No. That's all.
I'm sorry. I recognize microphone 1.
Reverend Beverly Lewis, Emmanuel United Church of Christ, Central Atlantic Conference. Just want to let you guys know we need to express an apology to one of our own in the name of cultural diversity. Reverend Amy Sins wrote the hymn we sang on Friday evening, We All Stand Together, and she was not recognized as the musician as other male members were named. So I think, heads up, Amy, good job. Second thing, I think this is one of those times when a little white privilege needs to be kicked to the curb. So let's kick it.
Thank you. Recognize microphone 1.
Again, Margaret Phillip from the Missouri Mid-South Conference. I just want to say we ask precious little of our professional clergy to maintain their standing, and other professions are far more required to do so. This is just one step in the process of becoming more professional in our chosen professions and called professions. And it seems like a very small thing for us to do.
I'll recognize the second opposing opinion at microphone 3, and then I'll come for the amendment to the motion. Microphone 3.
My name is Andrew Greenhaw. I'm from the South Central Conference. I think that training on cultural diversity and sensitivity to it is of utmost importance. And I'd just like to make an analogy. Several years ago, we required boundary trainings, and I think boundaries are of utmost importance. And I want to just get a feel for the clergy in the room. Who looks forward to those boundary trainings? Who feels like they really learn a lot at those boundary trainings? I rarely feel that way. I often feel like I'm required to go for an afternoon to have somebody read a PowerPoint to me. And because boundaries are so important, because it's really, really important to be sensitive to cultural diversity, I want to do more than just an afternoon PowerPoint. I want to have a course. I want to have seminaries involved. I want to have professors and PhDs and not just take Racism 101 again and again and again. Thank you.
Thank you. Chair recognizes microphone 6 with an amendment.
This is Reverend Dr. Diane Johnson from Northern California Nevada Conference. So I move to amend lines 9 through 11 and lines 17 and 18 to read, upon all the adjudicatory and educational settings of the denomination to include the study and training in key principles and best practices of cultural diversity, inclusion and equity, as well as anti-racism, unconscious bias, and anti-white supremacy trainings. Lines 17 and 18 should might read requirement, study, and training.
Thank you. Is there a second to the motion?
I'm Reverend Brian Murray of New Covenant Community Church here in Baltimore, Central Atlantic Conference, and I second that.
Thank you. The amendment is before the House. Is there any opinion for or against the amendment as stated? Seeing none,
Number 1.
let us move to vote. If you are in favor of the amendment, press 1. If you are opposed, press 2. Point of privilege, number 5.
One of our former colleague delegates asked if we could keep the amendments and resolutions on the screen longer so that we can read and understand what we're voting on. So I'd ask if you could put that back on the screen for us.
Thank you. That's actually helpful to me. I can see it. Well, I could. I can see it now. If we're ready to vote, all in favor will press 1. Oh, sorry. I'll read it. To amend lines 9 through 11, upon all the judicatory and educational settings of the denomination to include the study and training in key principles and best practices of cultural diversity, inclusion, and equity, as well as anti-racism, unconscious bias, and anti-white supremacy trainings. And to amend lines 17 through 18, the requirement study and training. Seeing no opinions for or against. Oh, sorry. Microphone 1.
Yes, Margaret Phillip from Missouri Mid-South again. I am the author of this resolution, and I see this as a friendly amendment.
Thank you. Seeing no other opinions on the amendment, if we're ready then to vote on the amendment. From a technology standpoint, are we ready to vote on the amendment? My trust isn't as good as it should be. If we're ready to vote, 1 in favor, press 2 if opposed, 3 if you wish to abstain. Voting begins now. At last, the motion is amended. Let us now have the motion that is amended before the House. Another amendment? Microphone 6.
It's still morning. Good morning. My name is John Zangari. I'm from Penn Northeast Conference. My amendment is a quite simple one. It's added at the end of line 12, and it'll read, authorized ministry within and on the behalf of the United Church of Christ by the end of 2027.
Is there a second to that amendment?
I'm Dallas Hess from the Penn Northeast Conference, and I second.
Although it's very brief, is it possible to have it up on the screen? I'd like to be patient only because what I heard is not exactly what was put in my hand, and so I want to make sure that. Would you restate the motion while we're waiting?
Yes.
Thank you.
At the end of line 12, it would read, authorized ministry within and on the behalf of the United Church of Christ before the end of 2027.
Since that is so brief, is this opinion standing against this amendment? Okay, so I'll recognize microphone 3.
I would like to speak on the amendment, if possible.
Yes, it has been moved and seconded. You're correct. Would you like to speak on the amendment? Microphone 6.
So, My amendment adds a simple yet needed change to our resolution. Currently, our resolution has great intentions, but truly needs more presence. We as the UCC need to truly push this ideology that diversity and sensitivity training should be a requirement for our authorized ministers. But friends, currently this resolution is all but a hope that maybe one day everybody might adopt this. But I say no. We are the National Conference of the United Church of Christ. We should push for more than a hope. We need a plan that says by the end of 2027, we will have made this a requirement that all authorized ministers in the UCC have diversity and sensitivity training. Not a hope that at some point people will adopt this idea on their own, but a plan that the UCC should adopt this idea by the end of 2027. My amendment adds the year 2027 to our resolution to make sure our pastors get the proper training before it's too late.
Thank you. Recognize microphone 3.
Hello, my name is Sonia Van, and I am a member of the Missouri Mid-South Conference, Christ the King United Church of Christ in Florissant, Missouri, where the newly elected Tracy Blackman is still the pastor of that church. I am happy to stand before you today as a person who wholeheartedly supports this resolution without that amendment. The issue here is that we are already seeing people dying almost every single day. And the call of the church is to react, but to also be there and be present in the midst of these situations. We are ill-equipped to do so. There are already trainings available that have been put out by the national church, by the Disciples of Christ, by several different organizations that we can already access and be a part of. There is no need to wait 10 years when people have already died. So I'm asking that this body votes for us to catch up and act now, join the wheelbarrow.
Thank you. Microphone 2.
Yes, I'm Kay Albright, pastor of Bridges of Grace United Church of Christ in Charleston, West Virginia, part of the Ohio Conference. And as we looked at this issue, I was on the committee, we realized that it was based on something that Synod 19 had put into place. We were just now responding to 19, and we're at 31. So we needed to put in a year. Thank you, sir, for bringing in that amendment. We need to put in a year so that people understand that this is not just a hope, but this is something that has to be reckoned with. It adds power. It does not take away power to this amendment by adding a year. Thank you.
Thank you. Microphone 4.
Will Tanner, Massachusetts Conference, here with the Board of Directors. I served on this committee earlier in the General Synod. I stand against this proposed amendment because 10 years is too long. If we really want to add urgency to this resolution, the amendment should be by the next General Synod. But it's 10 years. 10 years is too long. This is not a good amendment. Please vote no.
Thank you. It appears that the opinions have been expressed on the amendment as stated. If we are ready to vote, if you are in favor of the amendment, you'll press 1. If you are opposed to the amendment, you'll press 2. And if you abstain, press 3. Voting begins now. The amendment fails. We return to the main motion.
Number 6.
Microphone 6.
I'm Bill McCarthy from Illinois Conference. I wish to offer an amendment to the motion of Committee 9, and I want to speak to my amendment on the motion. I move that the therefore paragraph starting on line 96 of the Cultural Diversity Training motion be restated to insert a recommended deadline date as follows. Therefore, be it resolved that the 31st General Synod of the United Church of Christ calls upon all the judicatory and educational and of the denomination to include by January 1, 2025, the study of cultural diversity, sensitivity, and institutional racism in clergy preparation and continuing education as an ongoing requirement to maintaining standing for all persons engaged in authorized ministry within and on behalf of the United Church of Christ.
I'm sure we'll all need that to be put on the screen somehow.
Yeah. All we're doing actually is inserting the date of January 1, 2025 as an accomplishment date in line 96.
All right. Is there a second?
Marilyn Pagan Banks, Illinois Conference, second.
Opinions for or against the motion?
May I speak on
But you can speak to the motion first. I'm sorry. Thank you.
The United Church of Christ greatly needs the benefits and blessings that this important resolution will bring. We affirm all the content of the resolution as presented here. This amendment sets a date certain for its accomplishment. Setting a date imposes urgency. Even a date 7.5 years out imposes an urgency. For seminaries and schools of religion, this date allows 4.5 years for curriculum development and 3 years to matriculate and graduate students empowered with this new education. 7.5 years through 1/1/25 gives our conferences ample time to upgrade existing staff. At 7.5 years, enough time is being allowed for the logistical aspects of implementation to be worked out if sincere engagement is made. Setting no date imposes no obligation or even any moral obligation and would be similar to tabling the issue indefinitely. The United Church of Christ greatly needs the blessings and benefits that setting an accomplishment date for the work of this resolution will deliver. Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize microphone 3.
Hi, okay, my name is Emma Ritchie. I'm from the Pacific Northwest Conference. So to me, there's not an issue in providing an ample amount of time. By giving a date that's like so far ahead of us, like 7 years, I believe, I see as giving churches an option to wait. It's saying like, at this point then we need to be done, so let's start that year. Or, it's like if I have a deadline for a paper, I'm not gonna lie, I'm probably gonna wait until like I have to do it. And I think that the same could happen with this resolution, which I think is too important to leave to, it's too much time. So if we need a deadline, let's say next year, let's say by next synod, but it's not okay to give that much time for churches to put it off. Thank you.
Thank you. Microphone 1.
Hi, John Zangari, Penn Northeast Conference. I think there's a simple misunderstanding here. And with what the speaker who just spoke said, we need this to change for churches, but the problem is what we don't realize is this resolution has to do with seminaries and continuing education establishments. This does not have to do with your local church. If it was up to my conference, we would have changed this tomorrow or last hour if we could. But this has to do with seminaries and continuing education establishments. These places need time to make curriculum and to provide that curriculum and get it certified so that way we know we're teaching correctly. Just like with your boundary training and just like stuff like that, we need the time to make that kind of curriculum and get it into circulation into our schools. This does not have to do with our churches. Our churches are more than able to get this circulated tomorrow if we wanted to, but this has to do with pushing so that the future leaders of our church will have this in their curriculums.
Thank you. Microphone 6.
My name is Leandra Burchell. I'm from the Central Atlantic Conference, and move that the date of implementation is July 2019.
The intent I get, but because it is a motion to amend a motion at that point, to amend that, it would be out of order. The motion as it is standard to amend the motion has to be acted on first, then we can take that. Microphone 4.
Hello, my name is Deborah Blood. I'm the conference minister of the main conference. Here we are, a body of overwhelmingly majority white people fighting over the date we'll implement basic training so that we could even start to address racism. Could we please listen to our sister from Christ the King Church? People are dying. If there's a question about implementation, we should be having a resolution of confession that we haven't done this before now. If we're going to have a date, it should be right now. And this resolution, I would note, does call upon judicatory settings, which covers the whole church. We have a white privilege curriculum. There are ample, huge amounts of resources available. Let's do this now and stop talking.
Thank you. Microphone 3.
Meredith Jackson, the Missouri Mid-South Conference. I was on this committee, and I'm afraid that right now the body is getting a little lost in the weeds like we did in the committee. The General Synod cannot direct committees on ministry to do anything. We can encourage, we can support, so we can put in whatever implementation date we want, and committees on ministry will do whatever they are led to do. This resolution was written to be broad, knowing that every setting will have different implementation dates, different implementation styles, different requirements, and I think we need to honor that. Let us pass through this resolution without an implementation date, and let us support one another in finding the best way to make this training happen. We can talk about this for days, we can get lost in all the weeds we want. At the end of the day, people are dying, our ministers are not prepared to address these needs, and we can do better as a church.
Thank you. Microphone 5.
Hello, my name is Alice Hunt, and I'm the president of Chicago Theological Seminary and also serve on the United Church of Christ board. And I just want to let our church know that our seminaries are already doing this work. We already have the curriculum. And what we need to be focusing on is finding ways to get this out to everyone about doing this difficult work that we as a church need to do right now. It's not a request, it's not a hope, it's a requirement for being who we are as God's people in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I go any further, I really wanted to advise the speaker at microphone 6 that wanted to make a change of date to please see the floor parliamentarian. I just want to make sure that you have access to the floor parliamentarian to get done what you'd like to get done. So I'll look at then microphone 4.
Barry Jacobson, New Hampshire Conference. This is probably just part of our growing pains in terms of a new sense of nimbleness in formation for ministry. So if we assume the best about each other's intentions, it is great to hear affirmed that all that we need to move forward on this in each church, in each association, in each conference is available today. How about, instead of an implementation deadline, a witness deadline? Of next General Synod, we hear amazing stories from every conference and maybe every association about how we are living into, practicing, proclaiming, and transforming our communities with these works.
Thank you. Microphone 3.
My name is Ruth Harvey, and I represent Ministers for Racial, Social, and Economic Justice, and I speak against adding any type of deadline of when it should start. If anything, it should have started yesterday. Exactly. What people fail to understand, that this is not just something for European Americans, it also works with African Americans. I have served nothing but Euro-American churches. And just as you are being asked to learn the cultures of others, we also need to learn the cultures and the language of others to be effective. As we have said, people are dying in the streets. And what we also need to understand is this: we have a fiduciary duty to be the best that we can be at all times. This is the only profession that does not require.
Thank you. Microphone 5.
Jody Batten, Michigan Conference. I call the question.
Question has been called. We have already exceeded the allotted time for the discussion on this matter. We are prepared now to move to vote. Is there, just for clarification, is there a second to calling the question? I saw hands, so I appreciate it.
David McDonald, Wisconsin Conference, pastor, Windsor United Church of Christ. I second the motion.
And you move fast. Right. This is to address the amendment which inserts date and time. And we are going to call the question. The allotted time has already been exceeded anyway, so we're going to rule that we're going to vote directly on the amendment. If you are in favor of the amendment, you'll press 1. If you are opposed to the amendment, press 2. If you abstain, press 3. Voting begins now. The amendment is defeated. The motion on the floor is as presented. Microphone 1.
Afternoon. My name is Devin Thomas, and I represent the Vermont Conference. I minister in a state that is 95% white, and within that conference there is only one minority minister in practice. And I have to say, I cannot tell you how many times I've had a congregant come up to me and say, I don't see color. I am colorblind. And I wish, on more accounts than I can think of, that I was able to better represent my culture and my ethnic group better in the situation that I'm in. When it comes down to the question of racial training regarding race and justice within our country, I don't care if it is a 10-minute course, a 10-week course, or a 10-year course. We need that type of training in our religious leaders, and we need it now. So I am in favor of this resolution.
Thank you. Microphone 6.
Leandra Birchall, Central Atlantic Conference. I'd like to make an amendment to the resolution with inserting a witness deadline by July 2019.
Is there a second?
Helen Hinkson of People's Church and CAC, and I second.
Would you like to speak to your amendment? First speaker.
Yes. People are dying. Time is now, but everyone's not ready. And by July 2019, which is the beginning of Synod, the expectation is that all churches, all pastors are ready, that they have taken the necessary trainings, courses, offerings that are available. So the recommendation gives those entities time to get up to join other churches that are ready now.
Thank you. Any discussion of the amendment? I interpret that we're ready to vote on the amendment as it was presented to us. If we are then ready to vote in favor of the amendment, you'll press 1. If you oppose it, 2. If you abstain, 3. Voting begins now. Let's do it. While I wait, well, I can't see it from here. Does it pass? From what I can, thank you. From what I can see, the amendment passes. Microphone 5.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John Kendall, Illinois Conference. Point of clarification, then possible follow-up. Didn't you just say before that amendment that we had passed the debated allotted time?
In my opinion, I thought that the allotted time that for discussion had certainly exceeded. At the moment, what was on the floor was the amendment. I think that we have certainly exceeded time on the original motion as well.
Then may I follow up?
If you're about to call the question, I'd like you to do it from microphone 6.
Yes, sir.
Microphone 6.
Still John Kendall, Illinois Conference. General Synod, please say that, because I know you're doing that. I call the question on the whole amendment.
The motion.
Correction motion.
Thank you.
Kevin Peterson, Board of Directors, I second.
Thank you. We're voting on calling the question or ending debate. It's undebatable, so if you just go directly to vote, if you're ready, grab your clickers. To call the question, if you're in favor of it, you'll press 1. If you wish to discuss it further, press 2. And if you abstain, press 3. Voting begins now. Thank you. Matter before the House is the motion, the original motion, as amended. If you are ready for the question, I see mic number 2. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Question's been called. We are ready now to vote on the motion. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. If you are in favor of the motion, as it is on the screen before us, that has been discussed. You will press 1. If you oppose it, press 2. If you abstain, press 3. As amended, voting begins now. While we wait, I can tell, okay. The motion passes. Microphone 5.
Wayne Martin from the New Hampshire Conference, and I would just like us to take a moment. The UCC is a fractious group, and I would just like to take a moment to appreciate the patience and the excellent job that our 2 moderators have done over these days.
I appreciate that, because whether you need it or not, I need a 5-minute break. Don't leave. We still have business, but let's take a stretch break. Let's thank our music director, Tom Scott. Let's come back together. Let the rapids become like streams, calm. Thank you. We're pleased to welcome our keynote speaker this morning, Mr. Aaron Mayer. Mr. Mayer has been an environmental activist for more than 3 decades, a volunteer leader with the Sierra Club for 25 years, and recently completed his term as the Sierra Club's first African-American president. During his time with the Sierra Club, an environmental organization and one of the first large-scale preservation groups in the country, Mr. Mayer demonstrated his commitment to grassroots action, environmental justice, and transforming the culture of the Sierra Club to make it, in his words, a more welcoming environment to all people, regardless of their race or socioeconomic status. He became a Sierra Club member in 1999 after leading a decade-long battle to shut down a solid waste incinerator in inner-city Albany, New York. His efforts ultimately led to a commitment by the state to shut down the facility and a $1.6 million settlement award to that community. Mr. Mayer was also a key figure in leading the fight and securing the Sierra Club's participation in the Clean Up the Hudson campaign, which resulted in a settlement between the EPA and General Electric to dredge toxic PCB sediments from the upper Hudson River. Please welcome Mr. Aaron Mayer.
Dear brothers and sisters, I want to thank you for this huge opportunity and blessing. A little bit about my faith tradition. I come from Southern Baptist. My family, my mom's maternal side is out of Travelers Rest, South Carolina. And family church there since the end of slavery, actually even before slavery, but eventually established and during Reconstruction is at Golden Grove Baptist Church. We have an annual family reunion there every second week and third weekend of August every year. And we've been having that as a tradition, a faith tradition, a family tradition, a Passover tradition, so that we don't forget the burdens that our family has traversed through. But equally as well as my other half is my father's side, who's an Ellis Island immigrant from the island of Jamaica. And their faith tradition is Anglican. And I always tell people that if you want a household that would breed communities, is that you fuse Anglicans with Southern Baptist Church. But in all seriousness, I want to thank you for this opportunity and to be a witness for the past couple of days of your actions here at this convention. As mentioned, I was the former president of the National Sierra Club, an organization which is the nation's oldest conservation organization. In fact, you could say founded the modern national and international conservation and naturalist movements. This year we celebrate the 125th anniversary, and I spent my time not only in opening up that organization and diversifying it, but transforming its culture. The organization has over 3 million members, supporters, and activists. If it was a state in the union, it would be the 32nd state in the union. So I do have a sense of large and creating large and leading large significant change when it comes to transforming an organizational culture. But I want to say thank you for the honor of being here and to encourage the work that you're continuing to do with regards to social justice, spiritual justice, environmental justice, because again, the greatest example is that of Jesus. He lived for justice, died for justice, rose again, and lived again for justice. And at this particular moment in time of great change and tribulation, we need those organizations, those movements, to build a greater movement for justice. And let me say this, the path that this country is on, the journey that this country is on, again, it should have been done yesterday, but I'm glad that we are in this place and space of bringing about justice. And I'm glad to bear witness of the work that you're doing here with regards to the cause of justice. As again, I want to say we are in a critical particular time in which we are witnessing injustice all across this country, and we have witnessed, as I say, since Reconstruction. We talk about the 64, 65 Civil Rights Act and Voting Rights Act that have come to so-called bring about equality and integration, which comes on top of 52 years ago, the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment that not only emancipated my people, but basically made us citizens of this nation that we had built with our blood, sweat, and tears. And it's sad that tragic today that we are still having to have this conversation about inclusion. But like I said, the battle for justice and inclusion and diversity is something that all organizations must lift up their voices, all organizations must lift up their capacities and actively engage. The challenges that we face right now is quite existential, quite real, and that is the effects of anthropogenic climate change. In order to bring about change and bring about, as I say, quick, swift action, we must enlist all humanity. And we cannot enlist all humanity if we are not inclusive, welcoming, but more importantly, lifting up all voices and perspectives with regards to how do we save the planet and save humanity. Right now, the role of the United Church of Christ has been quite critical in elevating that voice in space. I want to talk about this conversation with regards to diversity, equity, inclusion, but more importantly, the contributions that this organization has made in transforming the environmental movement and how we have responded, but equally more importantly, the work to be done. Dr. Martin Luther King said very well, in a sense, all life is interrelated. All people are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied to a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you cannot be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of our reality. Dr. King went to his death in making that point. He went to his death for justice. So a lot of folks say, well, he died for civil rights, which is black rights. No, he died for human rights. He went in the field of justice for labor rights. Remember when in Memphis, he was there struggling for justice because he recognized the intersectionality of wages, income, as well as freedom and emancipation, but also equal protection under the law, the right to collectively bargain. He was shot down to clench his voice, not only calling for the full respect for justice, but recognizing the core underpinning of injustice is economic and social inequality. And many times folks are lost in an abbreviated understanding of his holiday. But add that, his fight for the overall conditioning, uplifting of the condition was predicated on this role of seeking justice. And connecting that to the environmental movement with this similar observation where John Muir said, when we try to pick at anything by itself, we find it all hitched to something else. In other words, our welfares, our collective destinies are all tied together. And one of the things that I am proud to say that the faith community has taught very clearly, it's the book of Genesis, the fact that we are a monogenetic people, Adam and Eve, all creation comes from that one root and source. And it's in that inescapable dynamic that we must, again, push for the equality and treatment of all humanity and uplift all humanity and uplift all human conditions. And for that, I am proud and honored that the United Church of Christ had a commission for racial justice, which produced something called our first National Toxic Waste and Race Report. And this particular ministry of yours resulted in perhaps one of the most significant awakenings in the environmental movement. And may I say, it has been transformative. Up until then, folks, advocated for the flora, fauna, and protection of the environment mainly from one cultural perspective, and mainly from that of the affluent middle-class white consumer use and exploitation of the environment. Folks did not connect the dots or recognize that all of us, all humanity, shares the environment. But what was really important and truly significant about this study is that it's not an emotional appeal, it's a data analytic appeal. It's not just a faith appeal, but it's one that goes right into the deep causes of inequality, which is poverty, and poverty linked upon economic disadvantage, and that economic disadvantage anchored in the institutions of racism and equality. So it keeps a structured, unhealthy environment. And one of the things that's very powerful that this study did was that it lifted up not only the consequences of environmental racism, and I know that the word racism makes some people feel uncomfortable, but let's be clear about what this is. This is the perception that some folks, some Americans, some countries deserve to be treated less at the benefit of first world countries, or in this case, a historical legacy of oppression in this nation that's anchored right and rooted right into slavery and bondage. But Jesus was a person of justice. Jesus was never a slaveholder. Jesus never engaged in segregation. Jesus never engaged in institutions whereby some had at the expense of others. In fact, he laid down his life in his ministry and proving the opposite and presenting the evidence to all humanity under the conditions on which it can engage and gain salvation. And this study was very critical in that it lifted up that same faith tradition, but using that data analysis to show clearly with laser focus how the institutions of racism within the United States had also played out in public and civil policy, how land use settlement patterns, whether it's redlining or zoning and ostracizing people by color, race, or creed, but also the stripping away of people's cultural connections of culture, custom, and heritage with that environment. The data analysis done in this study was not only pioneering, but it gave the analytical lens by which land use was done, and it broke down the systematic causes of inequality. But more importantly, it presented that challenge that in order for us to be better environmentalists, that we must recognize that the institutions by which the environment is degraded is anchored in the degrading of humanity. And that sin of degrading of humanity goes back to the founding of our great nation, which was predicated upon the institutions of slavery and also the institutions of genocide against the First and Fourth Nations. And over time, these institutions were reinforced and, as I say, pushed further by land use and land settlement practices and policies that basically created inequality. What the study of the United Church of Christ did was recognize our spatial dependence on land and how laws and regulations affect land use, but more importantly affect the conditions by which people live within that land, and that they must be transformed and changed. And that was the critical lens by which, and the critical awakening by which I came upon the study of the United Church of Christ. I want to talk a little bit about my community and how this study woke in, as I say, transformed my life. I came to the community of Arbor Hill in Albany, New York, which is basically the capital of the state of New York. And I settled in that community because my father and my faith tradition and my family tradition was that you had a choice. You can be a success or you can be impactful. A success is you go up, you rise up the middle class, you go up the ladder economically, you gain your wealth, and people worship you, or you get the praise because you financially represent that next rung on the ladder in the advancement of your community. To have an impact, you have to give back to your community. So I could have gone for myself to be a success, and it would have been okay, but I strove to follow in the tradition of my family and making an impact. So I settled in the community of Arbor Hill, which is a economically depressed community led mostly by single-parent women. High unemployment rate, the highest education rate on average was less than a high school education. And I decided, based upon my family's tradition, was to settle in that community, to organize with that community, to mentor with that community, to elevate and be a role model within that community to transform its condition. But little did I know that when I settled in that community, that I would settle upwind from an incinerator. So this is one of those cases where God put me in a place that he wanted me to be. And so with that, I realized that we were having a number of issues, not only within our family, but within our community with regards to environmental asthma, elevated lead risk, elevated cancer risk, elevated autoimmune disease risk. But I also noticed that my community was being coated with dust and particulates from an incinerator. So one of the things that I had to do was go out and do that community sample. By training a profession, I'm a public health professional, I'm an epidemiological spatial analyst. In other words, I make disease maps. And so in studying these patterns, and in studying what I perceived and having a hypothesis about the cause, I went systematically door to door, in which we made a map of the conditions in the community and the spread within our community. The long and short of it is that I had to step forward into that breach, not just because I stepped into having an impact on the community, but the community had an immediate impact upon me. That environment had an immediate impact upon me. And that specifically was that not only did we recognize that this incinerator was poisoning the community, my two oldest children at that time developed symptoms of environmental asthma. And so then as a father, I doubled down on my effort because I had to look at the conditions of other children within that community. And this brought me into a struggle, and as I say, as an environmental activist. And at that particular time, I just saw myself as a civil rights activist, a human rights activist. The last that I thought of myself was as an environmental activist. But the long and short of it is, this environmental condition called upon me to use that training that my father gave to me to say, listen, you have to be part of an organization if you need to transform, as I say, an institution. So with the environmental threat being an incinerator, the first thing I did was to try to organize and reach out to environmental organizations like the Sierra Club, NIPERG, and other organizations to see if they could help our community. We went to numerous organizations, and in short, they turned us down. Because the first thing they saw, A, was my color, and B, was the socioeconomic status. And that's, remember, that color and socioeconomic status is something that the United Church of Christ study brings out, because it's not a chicken and egg argument. It is a history of institutional racism keeping people of color at the lowest economic levels, and therefore creating the very economic conditions of stress that people, again, do the double whammy, saying, well, they're poor, we don't have the time to invest in that community. But the long and short of it is, I persisted, and I turned to my last organization at the invitation of a coworker in my office, was the Sierra Club. And I was invited to their annual meeting, something similar to, not their big one, but their state annual meeting in New York City. It's a little bit smaller than this. And by the way, it's an honor. It's like over 4,000 people here as part of your synod. But the long and short of it is, since I'm battling a waste incinerator and dealing with toxins from a waste incinerator, I figured that not only would this be up their alley, it deals with the issue at that particular time of solid waste disposal. At that time, New York State had closed Fresh Kills landfill, and they were trying to export their garbage up and down the eastern seaboard. And most of the communities they were targeting for that garbage happened to be in low-income communities of color. And systematically, they were rejected. And ultimately, the garbage barge started to then be being shipped to third world nations. And it ended up in a third world country. Again, people of color receiving the trash and burden from the United States. But in short, after making that appeal, and after giving that impression, that my case, what was important was a couple of things. But first, let me take a step back. When I walked into that community, when I walked into that meeting, the first thing that they did was a collective turn of the heads. And I thought it was my height, probably my dashing looks, it might have been this voice. But the long and short of it is, it was something much more sinister. And that did not pop up until as they say, the question and answer period of, after me making that case, of thinking about, well, what would you think the first question they asked? You would think that they would ask, well, wait a minute, are there other alternatives, and are they putting this stuff in other communities? No. The first question that was asked of me was, did you check with the NAACP? I came down to an environmental organization with an environmental crisis, with my family at risk and my children in my community at risk, a father whose daughters have been injured. And while I ignored the turn of the heads, what I could not ignore was one of the first questions that would come to mind in a community of privilege, because they did not see the privilege that they were reserving. To them, it was, here's a person that may represent a drain of my resources, but here is a person that is black that's representing a drain of my resources. So let me tell him to go to, or ask if he went to a black organization, did he do his due diligence? So their sense of due diligence was not whether or not I was being treated equally, or am I being considered equally relative to the policies of that organization, or treated equally relative to the policies of this country, but whether or not I proceeded in a segregated manner of seeking justice. So right then and there, I kind of figured that, I was not going to get far, but eventually they did vote, and they voted me down. They voted me down. So one of the things that I had to do was have a 3-hour ride back from New York City to Albany with the guy that invited me to that place, and you can imagine what that car ride was like. It was the white knuckle ride of silence. And my brother, who came a pure of heart because he was transformed by that event. Here he is, a white, middle-class person who believed that environmentalists cared about the environment. And it was right then and there that he saw environmental racism unfurl its ugly head. And he was apologetic all the way back from New York City to Albany. He kept apologizing so much it was driving me nuts. I said, brother, well, just relax. I said, listen, it's okay. I appreciated in him the blessing and the opportunity of at least me making that pure case. But I also recognized in that moment that something also happened, that he also saw something that I had been dealing with all my life. And any person of color, any community of color, but as the United Church of Christ Toxic Waste and Race Study brought out, all communities of color nationwide face that you are separate and unequal under the law, and that even comes with laws of the land when it comes to environmental protection. We're the wrong complexion for protection. And so in spite of that, I said, relax. I thanked him for his efforts and outreach. And that was on a Friday. Come the next day, the gentleman showed back at my door. Showed back up at my door, and I said, my goodness, can't I get rid of this guy? I got a community to save. I got activists to mobilize for. I got, rallies and protests to organize. What does this guy want now? Well, that guy, when he knocked on my door, he had 2 things. Actually, 3 things. The first and foremost, again, re-emphasizing his deep apology, and that those folks did not represent him, and that he was there as an activist and a brother in solidarity and a witness to what is happening. The second thing he had was a check for $250 and donating to the community. But the third and most important thing that he had that I was seeking was the tools and tactics of how to organize and mobilize to resist the incinerator. And he had a big campaign poster, our community's first campaign poster, as they would say, to organize and raise funds against the incinerator. And that had the picture of a pregnant woman in the shadow of a incinerator smokestack, the ones that was up on the screen earlier. And within the spines of her, she was carrying an umbrella, and underneath the umbrella, she had her child. And the spines had the dollar amounts of the appeal that we could raise. And that really transformed me, because here I had the righteous and just reaction of being rejected by the majority community, but here was another brother that still moved beyond the values and norms of white privilege to say, no, we are in this together. No, what happened was wrong. No, I will lead by example. And if they cannot be convinced to do justice, I, through my presence being here, am here for justice, and I stand with you, my brother. Now, let me say this. A lot of folks who are upset could be upset. A lot of communities of color often turn people still away because of the injury, because, again, this is about that conversation. Not only do we have to deal with the immediate oppression, but we, as communities of color, are often forced to be silenced on the disrespect and treatment. So in order to receive the blessing, you must be silent upon the persistence of institutional racism. And I told him, I said, listen, my brother, I thank you and I receive this and your words for which it spiritually wasn't truly intended, but equally and more importantly, I'm going to take this check and I'm going to go and, as I say, begin our movement, but I will also make a promise to you that I will come back to the Sierra Club when we are done and when we are successful to transform the culture of the organization. And that is exactly what I did. And part of what we often don't get to talk about when we talk about the unequal treatment and, as I say, the transformation that needs to be done is that of mutual respect. A lot of folks assume, like when I first walked into that meeting, that there is a separate environment for blacks and a separate environment for whites, and that most blacks are in an urban setting, and it's from that urban setting that, you know, they're living their communities and they're degrading their environment, and that's on them, and they should deal with it on their own like we deal with it in our environment. But I want to talk a little bit about that urban environment. But more importantly, how did I come to love urban environmentalism and love the land? And let me say this, most people of color who live in urban environments, they're part of a phenomenon called the Great Migration out of the South. And that Great Migration out of the South that shaped our culture and our pain was another exodus, because we had to flee the overt racism of the South and trade that off to the stifling hot heat of segregated racism in the North. But in my family, I come to connect to that land because of my faith tradition, but my family tradition, and the fact that we still own the land that we were on since the days that we were emancipated. The picture that I had above me, and I hope that we can get it back up, is that of my generations from my grandfather Zion, who was a slave, a teamster during the Confederacy, in the Confederacy, not of his choice, but of the force of his master, and later a teamster within the Union in the South, who bought that land upon being emancipated, the land that he pretty much was a slave on. And I grew up generation after generation since the 60s, traveling down, like I said, having our family reunions, but equally more importantly, our Passover talks, our family reunions like a Passover, on how we survived that oppression and never forgetting. And my daughter, Olivia, who's one of my 4 daughters, is the 6th generation free that goes to that land. And it's our culture and custom and heritage and survival and communal efforts that are tied to that land. The creeks that are on that land, which is behind our family church called Golden Grove Baptist Church, is where generations after generations were baptized and anointed. The land there is the land where our family cemeteries are, from those who died under the lash all the way up to those who lost their lives by racial violence in the segregated South. I remember I'm that last generation that is that link to that old segregated South and that partial transformation. But my daughters are current witnesses to that new South. But more importantly, they are connected to the land. So the notion of let's take a black to a park or take a black on a camp out, that form of tokenism is an assumption that African Americans have no connection to the land. Not only do we have a deep connection, we have a spiritual connection, because that land is what had to provide for us for generation to generation. The stewardship of that land was critical to our existence. And the only reason why it got separated and we got pushed off of that land, and many blacks were pushed off that land, but my ancestors managed to survive, was through, as they say, governmental policies and racial policies and laws that were designed to push communities of color off. Now, you've heard of a poll tax. Now, I want the folks to leave that one up on the screen so everybody can see it. You've heard of a poll tax, but this is an opportunity where you can absolutely see a poll tax. And we talk about forces within the Great Migration that forced blacks off the land. And we also talk about the vagrancy laws and the Jim Crow laws. But let's talk a little bit about a poll tax. In this poll tax, I'm not sure if you can see the price of the full tax bill. And this is from 1883. And this is my grandfather Zion's poll tax from during the height of Reconstruction of $2,281. $2,281. Not only did this poll tax pay for Confederate war veterans who wanted to keep him a slave, but it paid for the institutions of segregation and Jim Crow that would use other laws and other unjust laws to re-enslave them under the codes or the modern codes of vagrancy. Because many families had lost their land under these oppressive poll taxes, okay? And what's really critical, many of them, when they lost their lands, they were homeless. There were not homeless shelters during Reconstructions. People loitered around and they would do anything to try to survive. They would loiter and try to go from farm to seek work. But what the South did do was it passed anti-vagrancy laws. And so men, able-bodied men and women or families that were walking around, they were arrested. And they were put back on the very farms as chain gang workers, as prison workers, to be re-enslaved, as I say, slavery by any other means. And this is the height of Jim Crow. So one of the net effects was not only the transformation of the seizing of land, and mind you, at the end of the Civil War, blacks were fairly well off because they were first paid wages ever. First time the Union, when they hired them to do Teamster work, any construction work, they got paid real cash. And a lot of whites who were still mullering over whether or not they want to take a loyalty oath were unemployed. And most of them had invested their money into Confederate currency. So many of them were financially bankrupt. So those who had wealth were those who had wages. And so these laws were designed to tax them out of whatever discretionary or surplus income that they saved, and again, to push them back into a condition of servitude. So it is unjust laws like this that created the conditions of A, vagrancy, and at first prison, as I say, from society to prison complex where blacks were then re-enslaved in the South. Those who were able to get off those chain gangs immediately, that was that first wave of pressure of those going from the South to the North. And those coming to the North were willing to work for any wage, sort of like our immigrant populations who are dislocated by NAFTA. They migrate to places where they can get a wage so that their families can survive. They create class antagonisms by those who are at the marginal ends of society, mainly poor whites, who they directly compete for in the lower wages, and then companies engage in that exploitation in the race to economic race to the bottom. But once again, it is their race that is used as a cause that causes the inequality amongst whites rather than the institutions that create these causes. And so this is really important because another thing about this poll tax is that if you didn't pay the poll tax, in this particular bill, the poll tax is $1,000, so about 50% of that bill is the poll tax, the right to vote. And if you didn't pay that tax, any tax thereof, your land was taken, your land was seized, period. I'm happy to say that my great-grandfather, his revolutionary act was to not only employ the whole family, but distant relatives, but was to raise the money to every year pay his taxes. And the thing above that poll tax is his voter registration card. His radical act, knowing the price of freedom and his emancipation, was the right to vote. And that's a critical thing, because one of the tools of the poll tax and the tools of restrictive laws is to deny and suppress the right to vote by any means that they can. And the radical act of resistance was to vote, knowing that your vote is what's critical to transforming your condition. But he did. And that particular thing about that struggle is that he set the preconditions by which our family, but more importantly, many peoples of colors, are A, fighting for their right to live equitably within the land, but equally more importantly, to be fairly represented so that their rights are not taken away. But fast forward that struggle, that constant struggle of people of color fighting for their access to land, jobs, and labor. But here's the thing. We were farmers. So we automatically assumed as our culture, custom, and heritage, linked to clean air, clean water, clean soil, was a critical piece of our existence and being. So when you put communities into urban settings and concentrate them into urban settings that are ghettoized from the rest of society, not only do they feel the pain and longing for the land in the South, but also that disconnection from a deep part of their environmental and their rural culture and heritage. And one of the things that's really important to understand, the environment is not something that's pie in the sky or a luxury to our community of color. It is that natural state. It is that natural connection. And you will always find African Americans, Native Americans, Hispanics that are deeply connected to, as I say, to clean air, clean water, to clean soil, because often more than not, they turn to this for the subsistence of their family. And your action, the study done by the United Church of Christ, triggered an awakening within the African American, Latino, and indigenous communities, and more importantly, a challenge from that, your work, the data analysis from your work, to force about greater inclusion and representation of communities of color within that voice. And so for me, it's that long call, going back to my ancestors' emancipation and freedom, or to First Nations call, who've been around here since the beginning of time, for basically saying to big environmental organizations, if you're going to claim to represent us, if you're going to claim to speak for us, you need to have us at a table. And after your amazing study in 1987, the first call for inclusion came from environmental groups and communities of color all around the country to the Big Ten organization demanding a seat at the table. A seat at the table that had been long denied by the institutions of oppression and racism. And let me give you another piece of the Sierra Club that I had to daylight. Because again, one of the ugly sins of the environmental and conservation and naturalist movements is that it created something called scientific racism. Not only were we dealing with the separation and the identification of flora, fauna, and species, but also of the races. And at that time, during the early part of the 20th century, they created something called polygenesis. And from that, they assumed that all races come from different separate origins. And it was that scientific racism that was at the core. And Joe LeConte, who was one of the charter founders of the Sierra Club, and he was the personal mentor of John Muir, he was the heart and architect of our American national eugenics movement. And within that, his treatise on the South and Reconstruction, but more importantly, natural selection, et cetera, throughout all of our existence, was the separation of races, which is really kind of ironic if you think of it spiritually. Because if the Bible says that we all come from Adam and Eve, and up until that time, the abolitionist movements were recognizing that we are all one creation. Along comes the scientific theories that says, no, we're not. We're separate races, separate and distinct. There's no Adam and Eve. The blacks come from a black tree, the Asians from an Asian tree, the Native Americans from a Native American tree, et cetera, and the whites from a white tree. That very powerful analysis was the tool by which they then imposed a belief on what should be preserved and protected within the conservation movement. And so when you had the creation of the Yosemite Valley, the Yosemite Park that we all enjoy, few people know and are aware that Native Americans were removed from their ancestral lands so that white conservationists, by declaration of this new theology of conservation created by Joe LeConte, one of the founders of the Sierra Club movement, was that it's up to the superior races to be better stewards of the land. So when you talk about the foundations of the environmental movement, it is anchored in some of the oldest, ugliest aspects of racism within our society. And you think about that from that point on to this day forward, that it's not until the toxic waste and race study that you have a critical analysis of the consequences of that legacy that we're able to transform the relationships between people and their use of the lands, but more importantly, the relationships between people within organizations and who should speak for the land and on behalf of the land, but more importantly, that we should all speak together. And that, here's the big punchline. The conservation movement was one of the critical pieces that led to our greater social divisions. And it's the conservation movement that's being called for, as I say, back in the 30 years ago, to heal that rift and that division. So being part of that transformation and process, one of the things that I did enjoy was, as I say, creating and cashing in on my promise to transform the Sierra Club. So quickly fasting forward is that once we settled, I got that $1.6 million settlement that you heard of in the early part of my introduction. And one of the first things I did do was first tell my mom that I won a $1.6 million settlement. And the second thing I told her after that, I gave it away. And she thought I lost my mind. And it's kind of interesting because most people would say, listen, if you won something big and you did something significant, you've done enough. And again, that goes back to that success mode. But I want to make an impact. And an impact, by example, is that I won that fight by being smart, but also by sharing the stories of the suffering of the entire community. And it would have been immoral for me, just because I'm smart and I'm able to frame the argument and I'm able to organize and mobilize the pocket and reap the benefits of the conclusion of that legal action. The burden upon me, the moral thing that I must do as a leadership to have an impact, was to give back to those who suffered as I have suffered and share with them in the liberation and in the new knowledge that we can win and we can push back and defeat these forces. So that's one of the things that we had to do, was to reinvest in the community, not replicate, as they say, the successful models of environmental leadership, but the impactful models of environmental leadership, which are also anchored in the ways of Dr. King, who wanted to make an impact, but not in success. He went out to the lines of labor in Memphis, Tennessee, to take an impactful action, and he gave the highest price in that example. So mine was nothing more than a token price, but more importantly, it was in a transformative price by investing back into that community. So with that, With that win, I was able to now pivot away from the work within the community and, more importantly, building a national environmental justice movement. That's another thing, too. Your work was pivotal in shaping the plan for what would become the national environmental justice movement. Your study not only did the data analysis, it allowed for us to connect the dots. And with those dots connected, somebody had to dig those trenches. And being amongst one of the first organizations and people in those trenches and shaping those trenches, now that we have done that work, we were able now to, as they say, post those demands on major environmental organizations, but we also had to now become part of them to transform their culture. And that's one of the reasons why it was just a blessing to sit here and watch the debate early on, to ask amongst yourselves, how serious are we about this change? How serious are we about transforming our culture? How serious are we about giving all of God's creation a voice within this body? How soon can we get past the noise of white privilege and recognize that there's harm and that there's healing that needs to be done? How soon and serious are we about to bring about those things that we need to transform the culture so that we can absolutely enlist humanity in the broader mission of saving humanity and moving us from a path of destruction in which one race is pitted off against another race, one country pitted off against another country, to the point where we share the bounty of the land and the world that the Lord demands of us. And to that end, one of the things in going out into the Sierra Club and becoming its national president was to be that role model, but not just calling for, as they say, change, but recognizing the power of the presidency. And when you become the 57th president of the nation's oldest and largest environmental organization, you have a lot of power. And the issue is your knowledge on how you use that power. Think about it. I wore the shoes that John Muir wore. And now I put on his glasses with new lenses in the corrective vision of diversity, equity, inclusion. And this is important. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and racial justice, and justice, period. And let me be clear what justice is. It's not, being nice to minorities and poor people and disempowered people. Justice recognizes that all humanity deserves just and equal treatment and access to all of God's bounty and resources, tools of government, and all the things that shape our lives, regardless of race, gender, orientation, classification, whatever ability, and that justice is truly the example of Jesus. Justice is truly the color of Jesus. Justice is truly the way of Jesus. And pushing for justice is not pushing for we got to now be nice to minorities. No. There's no such thing as they say of conservative worship of Jesus or liberal worship of Jesus. If you are worshiping for Jesus, you are standing for justice. Jesus did not go amongst the wealthy and the accomplished to compromise and make favor. He chased the money lenders from the temple. He chased those who sought to buy access to heaven, to those, and replace it with those who would learn and love their way to heaven and earn their way to heaven by their works and by their deeds. It's not about by their possessions. And this is one of the critical things when your work was done with the toxic waste and race study. You did an analysis of the burdens upon the land and who's bearing them. And you asked the justice question, saying, listen, we recognize there's pollution. We recognize there's landfills, sanitation, and water treatment plants. But why are we concentrating them all within the black and the poorest community? And why are we setting aside for ourselves all the nature preserves, all the parks and preservation preserves, and every time there's an environmental benefit to be had, it goes disproportionately to the affluent and middle class, whereby it increases the values of their properties and their holdings. So your study and pushing for justice was something critical in lighting a fuse in the fire that we carried to the Sierra Club. And so transforming the Sierra Club was not talking about just how we act, but also talking about our culture. And that culture for justice is not about tokenism. It's about truly, some of folks have to get up from the table. We have to make place and space. And in fact, if everybody white has to be at the table, then everybody black, everybody brown, everybody Hispanic, everybody Asian, everybody gay, straight, disabled, all have to be at the table. We either include a place at the table for all or none. And if the table has a fixed number of seats, then we must be just in the distribution to make sure that table looks like all of us, all of humanity, all of God's creation, to be a just table. But we recognize that this is not enough. We recognize that we have to break through barriers and transform the culture. So one of the things that we did was that we created something called a strategic plan, in which we codified targets, but more importantly, the culture. We put up front that we will be a just, inclusive, anti-racist, and anti-oppressive organization. Now, I got a lot of pushback, because a lot of folks said that's not conservation. That's not environmentalism. I had to remind them in a letter that I posted as an op-ed piece within the Sierra Club Eco magazine. I had to give them a history lesson that it was the conservationist movement that created the racial inequality through the eugenics movement. And it's the environmental conservation movement that had a special burden, a unique burden, to tear down and dismantle racism and be representative of all God's creation. And to do that was not only to go after the organization and recognize that there's a green ceiling in which a lot of folks said, well, look, we're going to make changes at the grassroots level. But at the top, at the organization level, they kept still a green ceiling where mainly middle-class white males dominated the conversation. And more importantly, the funding for such activities is still going out in the segregated pattern. Well, working with the leaders of Green 2.0, we identified, and following the tradition of the United Church of Christ, put out the data and analysis of showing that this still unconscious bias and discrimination is still resulting in environmental racism and a lack of equity and inclusion, and that it must be transformed. But we also went forward and put forward a threat that in order to transform this, we also must look at the funding streams that go into these mainstream environmental organizations, not only calling for diversity, but making sure their key performance indicators from these foundations, that these grants request of all green groups, that they finance diversity within their organization, but more importantly, any program or any great idea that they put forward, that they had to have diversity, equity, inclusion indicators within any of their financial reports in order to continue funding. In other words, racism is funded, inequality is funded, and if you stop funding it, you will change the organizations. And it's beautiful to witness here that that struggle is occurring organically within this faith, but all churches. In fact, Dr. Martin Luther King said the most segregated hour in America is on Sundays at noon, right? And it's a shame that that is still true. That is a shame that that is still true. And so, more importantly, your example here is not just a struggle within the United Church of Christ, but you should be leading this justice movement and this justice crusade within the Baptist community, within the Anglican community, within the Catholic community. This needs to be full on. The entire dicta of these institutions need to be transformed if we want to change these societies. But equally more importantly, you know, when you talk about putting these things forward, you have to back them up with action. And one of the things that being in that bully pulpit as president was forcing for that action and change and leading by example, but not talking, but demanding that certain institutional reforms and changes, as they say, would occur within the organization. And one of the things that I had to do was had to basically push for a program, as I say, that identified factors that would make our organization diverse, but more importantly, successful. And one of the things that we had to fund, what we were talking about, invest in justice, you know, we also had to basically hire in justice, basically making sure that our hires are, as I say, as diverse and respectful of the continuum of society that we decide to serve as an environmental organization. If you're seeking to serve Jesus, if you're seeking to serve Christ, you must invest in the diversity of your humanity so that you enlist all of his voices in the choir in order to lift up the congregation and, as I say, strengthen it. Diversity is not weakness. Diversity is strength. You need the ability to communicate across race, class, gender, and ability, and also cultural lines. Recognize that the voice at the table is not the liturgy of what the, as I say, the sermon of the day is, but what is it, the voice? How are you seeing God from the Zuni Nation or the South Dakota Sioux Nation or the Lakota Sioux Nation? How are you visioning God and his voice? You have to basically make those places and spaces of witnesses available. Okay, and also institutional inequality changes. But these things are all critical because in order for us to face the bigger battles at hand, we must tear down those silos of race, discrimination, sexism, discrimination, classism, discrimination, because right now we face the greatest existential threat to humanity and creation, which is that of anthropogenic climate change. And there are those who unfortunately believe that there's no such thing as anthropogenic climate change. And these are the entities, as they say, that are successful corporations that have corrupted our democracy. And they are the ones who right now are the forces and factors behind a lot of global economic inequality. And right now, for us to challenge that power that's corrupting our democracy and our civil society, we must enlist all humanity. But to enlist all humanity, we must have the welcome place and space at the table. In order to do that, we must transform the old business models that are anchored in institutions of racism and oppression and inequality and transforming them into inclusive ones. We must bring all people and all voices to the table because the only way that we can save humanity first if we save our own souls and ourselves, and that salvation goes right to the fundamental tenets and commandments of Jesus to be welcoming and open and inclusive and inviting and healing and loving and compassionate. Until we do those things, we will not be able to enlist humanity. And if we don't enlist humanity right now, we face that crisis of doom. But we can transform this and turn it around. I thank you for the work that you have done in investing in the toxic waste and race study. You started and you lit the fuse of transformative, dynamic environmental change that was inclusive of all humanity's voices. Your work in racial justice in that space, but your spiritual work institutionally, internally, is still not done. You're still struggling with some of the old, ancient questions of whether or not social justice work is the ministry work and whether or not inclusive work is the ministry's work. This is the Lord's work. This is the Lord's prayer. This is the Lord's action. And without your action, without your continued action and support, things look grim. But I am hopeful. I am hopeful as you are transformed, so will your leadership transform the entire faith community within this nation. You are at the cutting edge of justice. You are at the cutting edge of conclusion. You are at the cutting edge of lifting all humanity. And I pray and implore that you continue this investment for the salvation of humanity and for the salvation of our society. I want to thank you for your time. And I want to thank you for your patience. I want to let you know something, that my daughters, I'm a person of the 20. Please stand for a second. My daughters won't believe that I'm sitting here speaking United Church of Christ congregation, so I got to do this. Don't be a fan of me. I'm a fan of your love and your work and your ministry and your blessing. I stand here because you did that study. You connected those dots. Let's continue to connect those dots. Let's continue to connect humanity. Again, thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you, Aaron Mayer. With us once again to offer a theological reflection on our times together this morning is Raven Rowe.
So this is super exciting. I know likely there might be some of you who are a little bit tired or a little bit cranky. And then I get to come up on stage and be like, hey, give me your attention. So I'm going to tell a really, really super short story. This picture, the story is one of the first times I ever heard Mr. High and Holy preach. Now, some of you may not know, this is my beloved name for the Reverend Dr. John C. Dorhauer. Really long story, really bad joke. The first time I ever heard him speak, it was at the Southwest Conference annual meeting. And there he stood wearing his signature preaching sandals, standing in front of the most beautiful sanctuary window that overlooked the red rocks of Sedona. And there he preached on a passage from Isaiah. He said, from Scripture, he said, "Do not remember the things of old. Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it?" This was the first sermon I ever heard John preach. He didn't stop with the words of the prophet, though. He continued. He said, here in this moment, in this time, what ways is the United Church of Christ being called to newness? We are a denomination that prides ourselves on our firsts. What new firsts are we being called to? I am so amazed at how the Spirit has been moving here in this room. And so, as a theological reflector, it was explained to me that it is my job to name the stuff in the room. I had a professor who named stuff, S-H-T-U-F-F. And so, in this moment, the stuff in the room, I believe that the Spirit is here with us. We've heard a lot of different voices today, but I'm so amazed at how the Spirit is moving in this room. It was the people with disability who identified themselves as such and spoke of their passions, and their voices were heard. It was the people who are living with the impact of oppression and violence and racism. It was those people who lifted up their voices. I really felt the Spirit moving in that. Here at this conference, we are talking about the rivers that are being made glad. But some of the people in our church are drowning from other waters, and we cannot be ignorant to that. I'm going to to speak truth and extravagant welcome. I invite you to hear it. It may sting a little bit, but it's okay. We can move through it together. Some of us here have privilege, and I know I myself have my own share of privilege. I'm not saying that white voices don't matter, or hetero voices don't matter, or cis voices don't matter, or male voices don't matter. By all means, all voices are welcome at the table. But when we, church, I love you, beloved church, when we are talking about these issues, we need to elevate and lift up the voices for whom these issues really matter. This is my radical welcome to you. I invite us to continue to do that. I'm so grateful to be here with you as the Spirit moves in this space. I'm excited for the newness that our denomination is doing. Blessings to you all on your lunch. Enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Raven Roll. And I'll call upon Lee Foley to bring us any announcements.
Hello, everybody. I want to thank you for your forbearance this morning with the voting problems. The clickers for this is our fourth Senate we've been using them, and this is the first time they've worked really, really well. But what we're having a problem with now is the display. There's some kind of hiccup between the clickers and getting them up on the screen. So because we know the counts are accurate, we're going to keep trying to use them, and if the display doesn't work, then we're going to wait about 5 or 10 seconds, and you're going to see the raw data. But I just want you to know that the counts are absolutely correct, and everything's working well in that regard. A reminder, Norm mentioned it at the start this morning, those wishing to take part in the immigration rally can meet now at the Pratt Street entrance to the convention center, and you'll be walking over to where the event's going to be held, and they say you will be back here in time for the plenary this afternoon. Yesterday's offering totaled $20,812. And our next speak out will be prior to this afternoon session, which starts at 2:30. And if you want to get involved in the speak out, you can see Ken Daniel back there in the center aisle. Everybody have a nice lunch.
Thank you, Lee. This afternoon's business session gets underway at 2:30, as Lee indicated. I ask that you try to be on time. I declare the fourth plenary is to be complete. We are in recess.
It's amazing what